Hey, ambitious souls! Tonight's story takes you into the glittering world of Alexander Donovan, a billionaire who didn't just build an empire, he conquered it with the ruthless precision of an apex predator. But when a fearless corporate strategist storms into his boardroom with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine, his carefully controlled world begins to fracture. In this realm where power is everything and secrets run deeper than bloodlines, one woman will discover that some men aren't just born to lead, they're born to hunt. Chapter 1. The 42nd floor of Donovan Industries pierced the Manhattan skyline like a blade of glass and ambition. Alexander Donovan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered territory. At 34, he commanded a financial empire worth $12 billion, but the numbers on his portfolio were nothing compared to the primal authority that radiated from his 6'3" frame. His reflection stared back, sharp cheekbones carved from marble, steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, and an aura of dangerous control that made grown men stumble over their words. What they couldn't see was the predator lurking beneath his tailored Armani suit, the supernatural strength that could crush a man's windpipe with a casual squeeze, or the ancient bloodline that made him alpha of the most powerful werewolf pack on the East Coast. "Mr. Donovan?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Morrison Industries team has arrived for the merger negotiations." Alexander's mouth curved into something that resembled a smile, but held no warmth. Morrison Industries had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years, and their desperation stank worse than fear. He'd been circling their company like a wolf stalking wounded prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Send them in," he commanded, his voice carrying an undertone of authority that made people obey without question. The mahogany doors to his office swung open, and 3 figures entered. Alexander recognized Morrison's CEO, a sweating, nervous man whose cologne couldn't mask the acrid scent of panic. Behind him walked his legal advisor, practically trembling. But it was the 3rd figure that made Alexander's supernatural senses snap to attention. She moved like liquid confidence, her 5'7" frame encased in a charcoal gray power suit that managed to be both professionally sharp and devastatingly feminine. Auburn hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, framing a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, high cheekbones, full lips painted in deep red, and emerald eyes that held no trace of intimidation as they locked onto his. Her scent hit him like a physical blow, jasmine and steel, ambition and fire. His wolf stirred, recognizing something primal and magnetic that made his carefully controlled world tilt on its axis. "Mr. Donovan," Morrison stammered, mopping his brow. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I'd like you to meet our new strategic consultant, Sophia Chen. She'll be handling the negotiation details on our behalf." Sophia stepped forward, extending her hand with the confidence of someone who owned every room she entered. "Mr. Donovan, I've heard quite a lot about your acquisition strategies." The word acquisition rolled off her tongue like a challenge. Alexander took her hand, and the contact sent electricity racing up his arm. Her skin was soft, but her grip was firm, and she didn't pull away when his fingers lingered longer than professionally appropriate. "Miss Chen." His voice dropped to a register that made most women's knees weak. "I wasn't aware Morrison had hired outside counsel, especially someone so." His gray eyes traveled slowly from her face down to their joined hands. "Young." Any other woman would have blushed or stammered. Sophia's smile sharpened like a blade. "Experience isn't always measured in years, Mr. Donovan. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly how to handle dangerous situations." The air between them crackled with enough tension to power the building. Alexander's wolf prowled restlessly, intrigued by her fearlessness. In his world, people either cowered or tried to dominate. This woman did neither. She met him as an equal. "Please sit." He gestured toward the conference area of his office, where leather chairs surrounded a glass table that could seat 12. The walls were lined with awards, photos of him with world leaders, and abstract art worth more than most people's houses. As they settled into their seats, Sophia pulled out a slim tablet and a folder that looked deceptively simple. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his presence filling the space like gravity itself. Morrison and his legal advisor flanked Sophia, but Alexander's attention remained fixed on the woman who dared to challenge him. "Gentlemen, Miss Chen," Alexander began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Let's dispense with pleasantries. Morrison Industries is bleeding money. Your quarterly reports show losses of $47 million over the last 6 months. You're here because you're desperate, not because you're negotiating from a position of strength." Morrison's face went pale, but Sophia leaned back in her chair, completely unruffled. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Donovan. Morrison Industries has had a challenging year, which is exactly why this merger represents such an incredible opportunity for Donovan Industries." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Most people in her position would be scrambling to defend their company's position. Instead, she was reframing the entire conversation. "Oh." The single word carried enough menace to make Morrison flinch, but Sophia's pulse remained steady. "Morrison Industries may be struggling financially, but we have something you need." She opened her folder and slid a photograph across the table. "The Blackwood Project." Alexander's supernatural hearing caught the acceleration of every heartbeat in the room, except hers. The Blackwood Project was a piece of undeveloped land in upstate New York, 3,000 acres of pristine forest that held significance far beyond its monetary value. It was Pack territory, ancient hunting grounds that his ancestors had claimed centuries ago. Morrison Industries had somehow acquired the development rights, and Alexander had been trying to buy them back for 2 years. "You think one piece of land gives you leverage?" His voice turned silky with danger. "I think one piece of that particular land gives us everything." Sophia's emerald eyes never left his. "Because we both know it's worth far more to you than the $50 million Morrison is asking for the entire company." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's eyes flashed with something inhuman for just a moment, a predatory gleam that would have sent most people running. Sophia noticed the change, her pupils dilating slightly, but she held her ground. "You've done your homework, Miss Chen. I make it my business to know what drives powerful men, Mr. Donovan. And you." She leaned forward slightly, close enough that her jasmine scent teased his supernatural senses. "You want that land more than anything else in your empire." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken challenge. Alexander could hear Morrison's labored breathing, smell the fear radiating from both men, but all of his focus was on the woman who had just cornered him in his own boardroom. "So here's what's going to happen," Sophia continued, her voice dropping to a register that was almost seductive. "Morrison Industries will accept your merger offer, but the Blackwood Project comes with conditions. Development rights remain with the original Morrison team for 2 years, with full environmental protection clauses. After that, ownership transfers to you, assuming you can prove the land will be preserved rather than developed." Alexander's jaw tightened. She was essentially holding his ancestral territory hostage, demanding proof of intentions he couldn't give without revealing supernatural secrets that would destroy everything he'd built. "And if I refuse your conditions?" Sophia's smile was pure velvet wrapped around steel. "Then Morrison Industries files for bankruptcy tomorrow, the courts take over, and the Blackwood Project goes to the highest bidder at public auction. I'm sure your competitors would love to get their hands on 3,000 acres of prime New York real estate." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Alexander's hands rested flat on the table, and Sophia couldn't help but notice how they seemed to dwarf the glass surface, fingers long and strong enough to crush diamond. There was something predatory about the way he held himself. Too still, too controlled, as if enormous power was leashed just beneath his civilized surface. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Chen. The only games worth playing are dangerous ones, Mr. Donovan." He stood abruptly, his 6'3" frame towering over the seated group. The movement was fluid and powerful, causing Morrison to instinctively shrink back in his chair. But Sophia simply tilted her head back to maintain eye contact, unfazed by his attempt at intimidation. "Gentlemen," Alexander said without looking away from Sophia, "you'll wait outside while Miss Chen and I discuss the finer details of this negotiation." "But sir," Morrison began.
Now.
The single word carried such absolute authority that both men scrambled to their feet and hurried toward the door. Morrison paused at the threshold, looking back at Sophia with genuine concern. "Miss Chen, will you be all right?" Sophia never broke eye contact with Alexander. "I can handle myself, Gerald. Wait for me in the lobby." The doors closed with a soft click, leaving them alone. The silence stretched between them, electric and dangerous. Alexander began to pace behind his chair, his movements too graceful, too predatory for an ordinary man. Sophia tracked his motion like a cat watching a snake, her instincts warning her that she was in the presence of something far more dangerous than a ruthless businessman. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Alexander said finally, his voice dropping to a growl that seemed to resonate in her chest. "Enlighten me." He stopped directly behind her chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. When he spoke, his breath stirred the hair at her nape, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "That land isn't just real estate, Miss Chen. It's sacred ground, and I will do anything to protect it." Sophia turned in her chair to face him, bringing them mere inches apart. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his steel-gray eyes, could smell the intoxicating blend of expensive cologne and something wild that made her pulse race. "Then we understand each other perfectly, Mr. Donovan. Because I'll do anything to get what I want to." The challenge in her voice made something primal unfurl in Alexander's chest. His wolf was practically howling with interest, recognizing a strength that matched his own. This woman wasn't just beautiful or intelligent. She was fearless in a way that called to every dominant instinct he possessed. "What exactly do you want?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it seemed to fill the entire office. Sophia rose slowly from her chair, bringing her body flush against his. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, but her stance radiated confidence rather than submission. "I want to know what kind of man Alexander Donovan really is when he's not hiding behind boardroom tables and billion-dollar deals." The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Alexander's hands moved to grip the back of her chair, caging her against him, without quite touching. The gesture was possessive and protective all at once, and Sophia felt her body respond to his proximity in ways that had nothing to do with business negotiations. "You sure you want to find out?" His eyes had gone dark, pupils dilated with something that looked like hunger. "Because once you know my secrets, there's no going back." Instead of backing down, Sophia reached up and straightened his already perfect tie, her fingers brushing against the strong column of his throat. "I've never been afraid of secrets, Alexander. The question is, are you brave enough to share them?" Chapter 2. The elevator to Alexander's penthouse rose through 68 floors of steel and glass, each level a testament to the empire he'd built from nothing but will and ruthless ambition. Sophia stood beside him in the mirrored compartment, hyper-aware of how his presence seemed to consume all the available oxygen. The tension from their boardroom encounter still crackled between them, unresolved and dangerous. "This is highly irregular," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched since they'd left his office. "Taking business negotiations to your personal residence." Alexander's reflection in the mirrors showed a predatory smile. "Nothing about you is regular, Miss Chen. Besides, what we're discussing requires absolute privacy." The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, revealing a space that redefined luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Manhattan, the city lights twinkling like captured stars. The decor was masculine and sophisticated, leather furniture in rich chocolate browns, abstract art that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime, and a bar that looked like it belonged in an exclusive gentleman's club. But it was the subtle details that caught Sophia's attention. The way shadows seemed to pool in certain corners despite the abundant lighting, the massive fireplace that looked built for something larger than ordinary logs, and the faint scent of wildness that permeated the air beneath expensive cologne and leather. "Impressive," she said, setting her briefcase on the marble coffee table. "Though I have to ask, do you bring all your business associates here? Or am I special?" Alexander moved to the bar with fluid grace, his hands steady as he poured 2 glasses of what looked like whiskey aged longer than some marriages. "You're the first woman to set foot in this space in over 3 years." The admission hung in the air between them, heavier than it should have been. Sophia accepted the glass he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The whiskey was smooth as silk and probably worth more than her monthly salary. "So, what makes me so special that you're breaking your own rules?" Alexander settled into the leather chair across from her, his gray eyes never leaving her face. In the ambient lighting of his penthouse, he looked even more dangerous, shadows playing across his sharp features, making him seem less civilized businessman and more apex predator. "You held a gun to my head in my own boardroom and didn't flinch when I showed you my teeth." His smile was all edges. "Most people who challenge me don't live to tell about it. Most people probably don't have what you want." "And what exactly do you think I want, Sophia?" Her name on his lips sounded like a caress, and a threat rolled into one. She took a sip of whiskey, using the moment to study him. Everything about Alexander Donovan radiated controlled power, from the way he filled his chair like a throne to the predatory stillness with which he watched her every movement. The Blackwood Project, obviously. But there's something else. She set down her glass and leaned forward slightly. "You didn't just want Morrison Industries for the land. You could have bought those development rights a dozen times over in the past 2 years, if that's all you were after. So, what's the real prize?" Alexander's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval. "You're very perceptive. It's my job to see what others miss. So tell me, what am I missing about the Blackwood Project?" For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. He stared out at the city lights, and Sophia got the impression he was wrestling with a decision that went far beyond business negotiations. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. "That land has been in my family for generations. Long before Morrison Industries, before development rights and environmental surveys. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's home." The simple word carried such profound longing that Sophia felt something in her chest tighten. She'd expected corporate maneuvering, profit margins, strategic positioning. She hadn't expected raw emotion from a man who seemed carved from granite. "Your family had to sell it? Lost it." The correction was sharp. Bad investments, worse luck, and creditors who didn't care about sentimental value. "I was 19 when the banks took everything." His hands tightened on his whiskey glass. "I swore that night I'd get it back, no matter what it cost." Sophia studied his profile as he gazed out at the city he'd conquered. There was something magnificent about Alexander Donovan in that moment, a man who'd clawed his way from nothing to everything, driven by a promise he'd made to himself 15 years ago. It was the kind of ambition she understood, the kind that burned in her own chest every time someone underestimated her because of her age or her gender. "You've built all of this." She gestured to the penthouse, the view, the empire beyond the windows. "To buy back 3,000 acres of forest? I've built all of this to never be powerless again." The words came out like a growl, and for just a moment, Sophia could have sworn she saw his eyes flash gold in the reflection of the window. The confession hung between them, raw and honest, in a way that transformed the entire dynamic of their negotiation. This wasn't about corporate acquisitions or development rights. This was about a man reclaiming a piece of his soul. "The environmental protections," Sophia said slowly, understanding dawning. "You don't want to develop the land. You want to preserve it." Alexander turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Every tree, every stream, every inch of that forest. Exactly as it was meant to be." "Then why didn't you just say that in the boardroom? Why the games, the corporate maneuvering?" "Because in my world, showing weakness gets you destroyed." He stood and moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. "And wanting something that badly, needing it." He trailed off, but Sophia heard the unspoken words. It was the ultimate weakness. She rose from her chair and crossed to stand beside him. The city sprawled beneath them like a circuit board of light and shadow, millions of lives playing out their small dramas while they stood above it all like gods of glass and steel. What if I told you that you don't have to choose between strength and honesty? She said softly. What if there's a way to get your land back without compromising your empire? Alexander turned to look at her, and the hope in his eyes was quickly shuttered behind his usual mask of control. I'm listening. Morrison Industries doesn't want your money, Alexander. Gerald is drowning, but he's too proud to admit it. What he needs is a lifeline that doesn't look like charity. Sophia moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. What if instead of a merger, you offered a partnership? Morrison keeps his dignity. You get your land back, and everyone wins. Partnerships require trust. Trust requires truth, Sophia finished. I know. It's a radical concept in corporate America. Alexander's mouth curved in what might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. You're asking me to gamble everything I've built on Gerald Morrison's integrity. I'm asking you to gamble everything you've built on mine. The words seemed to surprise them both. Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized the implications of what she'd just said. This had moved far beyond business negotiations into something personal, something dangerous. Alexander studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. And what exactly are you offering as collateral for that gamble? The question was loaded with meanings that had nothing to do with corporate deals. Sophia felt her pulse accelerate as Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could see the subtle way his pupils dilated, could smell the intoxicating blend of danger and desire that seemed to radiate from his skin. My reputation. My career. Everything I've worked for. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm betting it all that you're the kind of man who keeps his word. And if you're wrong, then I'll find out just how dangerous Alexander Donovan really is. The admission hung in the air between them, electric with possibility. Alexander reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face. His touch was gentle, but Sophia could feel the leashed power in his fingers, the control it took for him to be soft when everything about him was built for conquest. You should run, he said quietly, his thumb tracing along her jawline. Smart women always run from men like me. Instead of backing away, Sophia stepped closer, bringing her body almost flush against his. Good thing I've never been accused of being smart when it comes to dangerous men. Alexander's control visibly wavered. His free hand came up to frame her other cheek, his touch reverent and possessive all at once. Sophia. Her name on his lips was a warning and a prayer. She could see the war being fought behind his steel-gray eyes, desire battling control, want wrestling with wisdom. The air between them was charged with enough tension to power the city below. Tell me something, Alexander, she whispered, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. Through the expensive fabric of his shirt, she could feel the rapid beat of his heart, the heat of his skin. When you look at me, what do you see? His eyes darkened, pupils dilating until only a thin ring of gray remained. I see trouble. I see temptation. I see the one thing that could destroy everything I've built. And his hands tightened on her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. And I see the woman I'm going to claim, consequences be damned. The words sent heat racing through Sophia's veins. This was madness. She barely knew this man, had walked into his life only hours ago with a business proposition. But standing here in his penthouse fortress, feeling the way his touch made her entire body come alive, she couldn't remember why that should matter. Then claim me, she breathed against his lips. Alexander's control finally snapped. His mouth crashed down on hers with the force of 15 years of carefully leashed hunger, and Sophia felt her world tilt off its axis. He kissed her like a man claiming territory, his lips demanding and possessive, his tongue sweeping into her mouth to taste and conquer. Sophia had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with the raw intensity of a man who took what he wanted without apology, who commanded with touch instead of words. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid strength of him against her. Alexander lifted her easily, his supernatural strength making her feel delicate and precious as he carried her to the leather sofa. He settled her in his lap, her legs straddling his thighs, bringing them eye to eye in a position that was intimate and empowering all at once. "This changes everything," he growled against her throat, his lips trailing fire along the sensitive skin of her neck. "I know," she gasped, her head falling back to give him better access. "I don't care." His teeth grazed her pulse point, not quite hard enough to mark but with enough pressure to make her arch against him. "You should care. You should be terrified." Instead of answering with words, Sophia tangled her fingers in his dark hair and pulled his mouth back to hers. This kiss was different, deeper, hungrier, filled with the promise of everything they were both too afraid to name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to accept your proposal," he said quietly. "Which one?" Sophia asked, her lips swollen and her voice husky. His smile was pure sin wrapped in expensive suits. "All of them." Before Sophia could respond, the sound of Alexander's phone ringing cut through the heated air like a blade. He ignored it, his hands sliding up her spine to tangle in her hair, but the intrusion was enough to remind them both of the world beyond the penthouse walls. "You should answer that," Sophia said reluctantly, even as every cell in her body screamed in protest. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he reached for his phone. The caller ID made his entire body go rigid. "I have to take this." He lifted Sophia off his lap with gentle but firm hands, moving to the far side of the room for privacy. But even from across the penthouse, Sophia could hear the tension in his voice, the way his tone shifted from lover to something altogether more dangerous. "How did they find the location?" he asked quietly, but something in his posture made Sophia's skin prickle with unease. "No, absolutely not. Double the perimeter security and make sure the pack knows. No one goes out alone tonight." "Pack." Sophia's mind raced. She'd assumed he was talking about business associates, but the word choice was odd. And the way he held himself now, predatory alertness instead of corporate confidence, set off every instinct she possessed. Alexander ended the call and stood motionless for a long moment, his back to her. When he finally turned around, his expression had transformed from passionate lover back to dangerous businessman, but there was something else now. Something that looked almost like fear. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut this evening short," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Something's come up that requires my immediate attention." Sophia stood, smoothing down her skirt and trying to ignore the way her body still hummed from his touch. Of course, this was... She gestured vaguely at the space between them. This was probably a mistake anyway. Alexander was across the room before she could blink, his hands framing her face with desperate intensity. "Don't you dare call this a mistake. What happened here?" He kissed her again, quick and claiming. "This is the first real thing I've felt in years." The admission made her heart stutter. "Alexander, I need you to do something for me," he interrupted, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "Stay away from the Blackwood Project. Don't go there. Don't send anyone else there. Not until I give you the all-clear." The urgency in his voice sent alarm bells ringing in Sophia's head.
"Why?
"What's wrong? Just promise me, Sophia. Please." She studied his face, seeing genuine fear beneath the mask of control. Whatever had been discussed in that phone call, it had shaken him more than any corporate crisis could. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "I promise. But Alexander, if you're in some kind of trouble, if you need help." His smile was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. "You're already helping me more than you know." 20 minutes later, Sophia stood on the sidewalk outside Donovan Industries, her lips still swollen from Alexander's kisses and her mind reeling from everything that had transpired. The rational part of her brain was screaming that she'd just made the worst mistake of her career, that getting personally involved with a client was professional suicide. But as she hailed a cab and gave the driver her address, all she could think about was the way Alexander had looked at her, like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in a single package. Whatever secrets he was hiding, whatever danger had prompted that mysterious phone call, she was already in too deep to care about the consequences. As her taxi pulled away from the curb, Neither Sophia nor Alexander noticed the dark sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the way it began to follow her cab through the nighttime streets of Manhattan. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than either of them realized. Chapter 3. 3 days had passed since Sophia's encounter with Alexander Donovan, and the memory of his touch still burned beneath her skin like a brand. She'd thrown herself into work with desperate intensity, reviewing Morrison's financial reports and drafting partnership proposals until her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. But no amount of corporate busywork could erase the feeling of his hands framing her face, or the way his voice had dropped to that dangerous growl when he'd promised to claim her. Her temporary office on the 34th floor of Morrison Industries felt cramped and sterile compared to Alexander's glass fortress, but it served her purposes. Through her window, she could see the Donovan Industries tower piercing the sky like a steel needle, and she found herself staring at it far more often than was professionally appropriate. A knock on her door interrupted her brooding. Gerald Morrison entered without waiting for permission, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly as he clutched a manila folder. "Sophia, we need to talk. Now." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting the way his eyes darted nervously toward the window. "What's wrong, Gerald? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse." He slumped into the chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "I've been getting calls. Threats, actually." Sophia's blood chilled. "What kind of threats?" "The kind that mention my wife's morning jogging route and my daughter's apartment address." Gerald's voice shook with barely controlled fear. "Someone doesn't want this merger to go through, and they're willing to hurt my family to stop it." The folder in Gerald's hands contained photographs, surveillance shots of his wife at the grocery store, his daughter leaving her law firm, even their family dog being walked by their housekeeper. The images were high quality and taken from multiple angles, showing a level of professional stalking that made Sophia's skin crawl. "Have you gone to the police?" "And told them what?" "That someone's taking pictures of public activities." Gerald laughed bitterly. "These people are professionals, Sophia. They know exactly how to threaten without crossing legal lines." Sophia studied the photographs, her mind racing. The timing was too convenient. Threats emerging just as she and Alexander had reached an understanding, just as the Blackwood project was finally within his grasp. "Who else knows about the partnership proposal we discussed with Donovan?" "Just my legal team and—" Gerald stopped, his face going even paler. "Christ. Marcus Webb." Marcus Webb was Morrison Industries' former vice president, an ambitious executive who'd been passed over for promotion 6 months earlier and subsequently fired for what Gerald had diplomatically called creative differences. If anyone had reason to sabotage the merger, it would be Webb. Could he be behind this? Marcus has connections throughout the industry. If he wanted to hurt Morrison Industries. Gerald trailed off, but Sophia could fill in the blanks. A disgruntled former executive with inside knowledge and industry contacts would know exactly how to destroy a company from the outside. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Alexander's name on the screen made her pulse quicken despite the circumstances. "Need to see you. Urgent. Meet me at the Meridian Hotel, penthouse suite. Come alone." The message was terse and unlike Alexander's usual commanding but eloquent communication style. Something was wrong. "Gerald, I need you to take your family somewhere safe. A hotel, a relative's house, somewhere Webb can't find them." "What about the merger? If we disappear now?" "Let me worry about the merger." Sophia was already gathering her things, her mind spinning with possibilities. "Just protect your family. I'll handle everything else." 20 minutes later, Sophia stood in the elevator of the Meridian Hotel, Manhattan's most exclusive establishment. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor, and as the elevator doors opened, she found herself in a space that rivaled Alexander's own penthouse for luxury. But Alexander wasn't alone. 3 men stood around the suite's main room, and every instinct Sophia possessed screamed danger. They were all tall, broad-shouldered, and carried themselves with a kind of fluid grace that suggested violence was never more than a heartbeat away. When they turned to look at her, their eyes held an inhuman intensity that made her skin prickle with primitive alarm. Alexander emerged from the bedroom area, and Sophia's breath caught. Gone was the impeccably groomed businessman she'd come to know. His dark hair was disheveled, his shirt was torn at the collar, and there were scratches on his face that looked suspiciously like claw marks. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They burned with gold fire that definitely wasn't human. Sophia. His voice was rougher than usual, carrying an undertone that resonated in her chest like a growl. Thank you for coming. What happened to you? She moved toward him instinctively, but one of the other men stepped into her path. Up close, she could see that his eyes held the same unnatural golden glow. She doesn't know, the man said, and his voice carried the same odd resonance as Alexander's. You brought her here without telling her what she's walking into. Tell me what? Sophia looked between the four men, her heart racing. Alexander, what's going on? Alexander moved to stand beside her, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body, like a furnace. When he spoke, his hand found the small of her back in a gesture that was protective and possessive all at once. Sophia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me. The golden fire in his eyes was hypnotic, and despite every rational thought screaming at her to run, Sophia found herself nodding. The Blackwood Project isn't just land to me. It's pack territory. Sacred hunting grounds that have belonged to my family for over 200 years. Alexander's hand pressed more firmly against her back. My family, Sophia. My pack. Because I'm not entirely human. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sophia stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some indication that this was an elaborate joke. But the intensity in his golden eyes, the predatory stillness of the other men, the scratches on his face that were healing even as she watched, none of it was human. Pack, she repeated slowly. You mean like wolves? Alexander's smile held no humor. Werewolves, to be precise. And right now my pack is under attack. Sophia's legs suddenly felt unsteady. She sank onto the leather sofa, her mind struggling to process information that defied everything she thought she knew about reality. This is insane. Werewolves don't exist. They're mythology, folklore. Alexander knelt in front of her, his hands taking hers with infinite gentleness. Look at me, Sophia. Really look. As she watched, his features began to shift subtly. His canine teeth elongated into fangs, his fingernails became claws, and his eyes blazed with predatory fire that was definitely not human. The change lasted only seconds, but it was enough to shatter every assumption she'd ever held about the natural world. Oh my God, she whispered. 3 nights ago, someone started hunting members of my pack, Alexander continued, his voice steady despite the supernatural revelation he'd just shared. Professional hunters with silver bullets and knowledge of our weaknesses. So far, 2 of my people are dead, and 5 others are missing. One of the other men, a blonde giant who radiated barely controlled violence, spoke up. The attacks are coordinated, Alpha. Someone's feeding them inside information about our movements, our safe houses. Alpha. The word clicked into place with devastating clarity. Alexander wasn't just a werewolf, he was their leader. The commanding presence she'd attributed to corporate success was actually supernatural authority, the natural dominance of an apex predator. Why are you telling me this? Sophia asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Alexander's hands tightened on hers. Because whoever's behind the attacks knows about you. They know you're working on the Morrison merger, they know about the Blackwood Project, and they know. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. They know what you mean to me. The admission made her heart stutter. What I mean to you? You're my mate, Sophia. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. I knew at the moment I caught your scent, the moment you walked into my boardroom and refused to be intimidated. You're mine, and I'm yours, whether we understand it or not. Mate. The word resonated through her body like a struck bell, awakening something primal and fierce that she'd never known existed. Looking at Alexander now, this dangerous, magnificent creature who commanded empires and ruled supernatural beings, everything suddenly made sense. The instant attraction, the way her body responded to his touch, the feeling that she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life. "This is why you wanted me to stay away from the Blackwood Project," she said slowly. "The hunters are using it as their base of operations. They know we need that land, that we'll eventually have to go there to reclaim it." Alexander's jaw tightened. "It's a trap, and they're using you as bait." The blonde man stepped forward again. "Alpha, we need to move her to the safe house. If they're targeting her—"
"No."
Sophia stood abruptly, surprising everyone in the room. "I'm not running and hiding while people are trying to kill you. If they want to use me as bait, then let's use that against them." Alexander rose to tower over her, his eyes flashing dangerous gold. "Absolutely not. I won't risk you. And I won't let you face this alone." Sophia stepped closer, bringing her body almost against his. "You said I was your mate, Alexander. That means we're equals, not that you get to lock me away for safekeeping." The tension between them was electric, dominance meeting determination in a clash that made the other men step back nervously. Finally, Alexander's expression softened slightly. "You don't understand what you're asking for. Then explain it to me." Sophia reached up to touch the scratches on his face, amazed when they continued healing under her fingertips. "Help me understand your world, so I can help protect it." Alexander caught her hand and pressed it flat against his cheek, his eyes closing briefly at the contact. When he opened them again, they held a mixture of desire and desperation that made her breath catch. "The Blackwood Project isn't just packed territory. It's where we buried our dead, where we conduct our most sacred rituals. Without it, we'll lose connection to everything that makes us who we are." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "We'll become nothing more than monsters." The pain in his voice made something in Sophia's chest clench. This proud, powerful man was fighting for the soul of his people, and she was the key to either their salvation or their destruction. "Then we get your land back," she said firmly. "And we make whoever's hunting your pack pay for what they've done." Alexander's smile was beautiful and terrible all at once. "It won't be easy. These hunters are professionals, and they have resources that rival my own. We're fighting a war on two fronts, corporate and supernatural. Good thing I'm very good at both kinds of warfare." The sound of Alexander's phone ringing cut through the moment like a blade. He glanced at the caller ID, and his entire body went rigid. "It's Gerald Morrison," he said quietly. "This can't be good news." He answered on speaker, and Gerald's panicked voice filled the penthouse suite. "Sophia? Thank God you're there. They took her. They took my daughter." Sophia felt ice flood her veins. "What? Who took her?" "Men in suits. Professional looking, but their eyes." Gerald's voice broke. "Their eyes weren't human. They left a message. They want to meet with you and Donovan. Tonight. At the Blackwood Project." Alexander's hand found Sophia's, his grip tight enough to be painful. Around the room, the other pack members began to growl, a sound that raised every hair on Sophia's arms. "What exactly did they say, Gerald?" "They said to tell you that if you want to see Jenny alive again, you'll come to the old hunting lodge on the north side of the property. Alone. No police, no backup." Gerald's breathing was ragged. "They said to bring the merger documents and the original land deeds. They want everything." Sophia looked at Alexander, seeing her own grim determination reflected in his golden eyes. The trap was closing around them, exactly as he'd predicted. But now it wasn't just about packed territory or corporate mergers. An innocent woman's life hung in the balance. "Tell them we'll be there," Alexander said quietly. "Alexander, no." The blonde pack member started. "We'll be there," Alexander repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. "But tell them they'd better pray nothing happens to the girl. Because if she's hurt, I'll hunt down every last one of them and make them beg for death." The promise was delivered with such cold menace that even Sophia shivered. Gerald mumbled his understanding and ended the call, leaving them in heavy silence. "It's a trap," the blonde man stated unnecessarily. "Of course it's a trap." Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. "The question is whether we're walking into it or setting one of our own." Chapter 4. The Blackwood Project sprawled across 3,000 acres of pristine wilderness 60 miles north of Manhattan, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest like a scar through green velvet. Sophia sat in the passenger seat of Alexander's black Porsche, her hands clenched to her lap as they navigated the treacherous curves. The merger documents and original land deeds were secured in a briefcase at her feet, everything the kidnappers had demanded. "Tell me again why we couldn't bring backup," she said, glancing in the side mirror at the empty road behind them. Alexander's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "Because they'll kill the girl the moment they detect other wolves on the property. These hunters know our scent, our hearing, our capabilities. They've been studying us." The forest pressed close on either side of the road, ancient trees that had stood when this land belonged to Alexander's ancestors. Even in the fading daylight, Sophia could sense something primal about this place, as if the very air held memories of running wolves and moonlit hunts. "How long has this land been in your family?" 237 years. Alexander's voice carried pride and pain in equal measure. "My great-great-grandfather won it in a card game from a drunk railroad baron. Probably the only honest game of poker ever played in New York, because the human had no idea what he was gambling away." Despite the circumstances, Sophia found herself smiling slightly. "And your family's been here ever since?" "Until I lost it 15 years ago." Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The pack scattered when I couldn't protect what was ours. Some joined other territories, others went lone wolf. I've spent every day since then trying to earn their trust back." The pain in his voice made Sophia's chest ache. She reached over to cover one of his hands with hers, and he immediately turned his palm up to intertwine their fingers. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm, that same electric connection she'd felt in his boardroom and his penthouse. "You'll get it back," she said softly. "We'll get it back." Alexander lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was gentle and possessive all at once. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into, Sophia Chen? A werewolf pack war, corporate espionage, and kidnapping?" She managed a shaky laugh. "Just another Tuesday in the life of a strategic consultant." Alexander's smile was the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him since they'd received Gerald's call. "Most humans would have run screaming by now." "I'm not most humans." "No," he agreed, his golden eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the road. "You're definitely not." The old hunting lodge emerged from the forest like something from a Gothic novel, massive stone walls covered in ivy, tall windows that reflected the dying light like watching eyes, and a circular driveway that had seen better decades. 2 black SUVs were parked near the entrance, their windows tinted dark enough to hide whatever waited inside. Alexander parked the Porsche next to the SUVs and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, Sophia could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Stay close to me," Alexander said quietly. "No matter what happens, don't leave my side. These people won't hesitate to use you against me." They approached the lodge together, Sophia carrying the briefcase while Alexander moved with predatory alertness that made her hyper-aware of every shadow, every potential threat. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a man in an expensive suit who might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. "Mr. Donovan. Miss Chen. So good of you to accept our invitation." The man's voice carried a slight accent, European, possibly German, and his smile was all teeth and no warmth. Behind him, Sophia could see other figures moving in the lodge's dim interior, but the lighting was too poor to make out details. "Where's the girl?" Alexander's voice dropped to that dangerous growl that made Sophia's spine tingle. "Safe. For now." The man stepped aside, gesturing them into the lodge. "Please come in. We have much to discuss." The interior of the lodge was a study in faded grandeur, stone fireplaces large enough to roast entire animals, mounted deer heads whose glass eyes seemed to track their movement, and furniture that spoke of wealth from a bygone era. But it was the people scattered throughout the room that made Sophia's blood run cold. There were 8 of them, all dressed in dark clothing, all carrying themselves with military precision. But it was their eyes that gave them away, cold, empty, and utterly without mercy. These weren't corporate assassins or standard criminals. These were predators who hunted other predators for sport. "Allow me to introduce myself," the blond man said, moving to stand behind what was clearly the position of authority in the room. "Heinrich Kruger. I represent certain interests that have been concerned about recent supernatural activities in this region." Alexander's body went rigid beside her. "Kruger. I should have known. You know each other?" Sophia asked quietly. "By reputation." Alexander's eyes never left Kruger's face. "The Kruger family has been hunting werewolves for 6 generations. They're very good at what they do." Kruger's smile widened. "Your reputation precedes you as well, Alpha Donovan. Though I must say, you're quite different from your predecessor." The words carried implications that made something dangerous flash in Alexander's golden eyes. "Leave my father out of this, Hunter." "Oh, but your father is very much a part of this conversation." Kruger moved to an antique desk and picked up a leather-bound journal. His journals, his maps, his detailed records of every pack member and their weaknesses. Quite illuminating reading. Sophia felt Alexander's control wavering, saw his hands beginning to shift as claws started to emerge from his fingernails. She stepped closer to him, letting her presence anchor him before he did something that would get them both killed. "You have what you wanted," she said to Kruger, lifting the briefcase. "The merger documents, the land deeds, everything. Now where's Gerald's daughter?" "Ah yes, the lovely Miss Morrison." Kruger snapped his fingers, and 2 of his men disappeared into another room. Moments later, they returned dragging a young woman who looked like a female version of Gerald. Same dark hair, same intelligent eyes, though hers were currently wide with terror. Jenny Morrison was bound and gagged, but she appeared unharmed. When she saw Sophia and Alexander, hope flickered across her features. "As you can see, she's perfectly safe," Kruger continued conversationally. "Though I'm afraid her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." "What do you want?" Alexander asked through gritted teeth. "Quite simple, really. I want you to sign over all rights to the Blackwood project to my organization. Not just the development rights, everything. The land, the mineral rights, the historical preservation status. All of it." Sophia stared at him in shock. "That's impossible. The land rights are owned by Morrison Industries, and the historical preservation can be overturned with the right paperwork and sufficient motivation." Kruger's pale eyes glittered with malice. "You'd be amazed what people will sign when properly motivated. And in return?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "In return, Miss Morrison lives. Your pack stops receiving silver bullets in the middle of the night, and everyone goes home happy." Kruger spread his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. "Of course, you'll also need to leave New York permanently. Can't have you trying to reclaim your territory later." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia could hear the wind rattling the lodge's windows, could smell the scent of wood smoke and something else, something metallic that made her stomach turn. She realized with dawning horror that it was the smell of blood. "You've already killed members of his pack," she said quietly. "Regrettable but necessary losses." Kruger didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. When you're dealing with monsters, you can't afford to show weakness. The word monsters hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sophia saw something break behind his eyes, saw the careful control he'd maintained throughout his corporate life finally begin to crack. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that made every person in the room step back instinctively. "Monsters?" Alexander's smile was all fangs and fury. "You want to see a monster?" The transformation was unlike anything Sophia could have imagined. Alexander's human facade didn't simply fall away. It exploded outward in a display of supernatural power that redefined every assumption she'd held about the possible. His body expanded, muscles rippling and reforming, his face elongating into something that was part man and part apex predator. When the change was complete, a 7-foot creature of claws and fangs and golden fire stood where Alexander Donovan had been. The effect on Kruger's men was instantaneous. Weapons appeared in their hands as if by magic, but Alexander was already moving. He flowed through the room like liquid violence, claws rending flesh and fangs tearing through arteries. The hunters were trained, professional killers, but they were facing something beyond their experience, a supernatural predator in his ancestral territory, fighting for his mate and his pack's survival. Sophia pressed herself against the wall, clutching the briefcase and trying to stay out of the way of the battle raging around her. She caught glimpses of the carnage, Kruger screaming orders, his men firing silver bullets that sparked against Alexander's hide without slowing him down, blood spattering across expensive furniture and priceless antiques. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. 6 of Kruger's 8 men lay dead or dying, their blood soaking into the lodge's ancient floorboards. Alexander stood in the center of the destruction, his chest heaving, his golden eyes fixed on Kruger with predatory intensity. "You made a critical error in your research, Hunter," Alexander growled, his voice distorted by his transformed throat. "My father was a decent alpha, but he was weak. He believed in coexistence, in hiding from humans instead of ruling them." Alexander took a step closer to the terrified Kruger. "I'm not my father." Kruger raised his weapon, some kind of specialized rifle that gleamed with silver inlay, but before he could fire, the lodge's windows exploded inward. Massive forms poured through the shattered glass like avenging angels. Alexander's pack arrived despite his orders to stay away. The blonde giant from the hotel landed in a crouch next to Jenny Morrison, his claws making quick work of her bonds while keeping his body between her and any remaining threats. 2 other wolves flanked Kruger, cutting off his escape routes, while a 4th began systematically checking the fallen hunters for signs of life. "Disobedient pack," Alexander said, but there was approval in his voice as he began to shift back to human form. "I thought I told you to stay away." "With respect, Alpha," the blonde replied, helping Jenny to her feet. "We're not letting you face hunters alone ever again. Not after what happened to the others." Alexander's expression darkened. "How many?" "Marcus Webb is alive." "Barely. The hunters had him in one of the back rooms, but he's lost a lot of blood." The pack members' jaw tightened. "They were using him as bait, Alpha, torturing him to draw us here." Marcus Webb, the disgruntled former Morrison Industries executive. Sophia's mind raced as pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place. "He wasn't working with them," she said suddenly. "Webb wasn't trying to sabotage the merger. He was trying to warn us." Alexander, now fully human again but still splattered with blood, turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "The threats against Gerald's family, the surveillance photos. What if Webb discovered Kruger's plan and tried to stop the merger to protect everyone involved? What if he knew that bringing you and the land together would trigger exactly this kind of confrontation?" Kruger, now disarmed and surrounded by snarling werewolves, began to laugh. "Very good, Miss Chen. Though you're only partially correct. Webb did discover our operation, but he wasn't trying to stop it. He was trying to sell information to the highest bidder." "Liar." Jenny Morrison spoke for the first time, her voice shaky but determined. "I heard them torturing him. He never told them anything about pack movements or safe houses. That's why they needed me, to force Mr. Donovan to come here on their terms." Alexander moved to stand beside Sophia, his presence radiating protective fury. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that this ends tonight." He looked at Kruger with eyes that held no trace of mercy. "You kill members of my pack. You threaten my mate. You tortured one of my people and kidnapped an innocent woman." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't tear your throat out right here." Kruger's composure finally cracked, revealing the fear beneath his arrogant facade. "You can't kill me. I'm human. There are laws. Human laws don't apply to monsters, remember?" Alexander's smile was terrible to behold. "And you've made it very clear what you think we are." But before Alexander could act on his threat, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Searchlights blazed through the broken windows, and loudspeakers crackled with official authority. "This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Sophia grabbed Alexander's arm. How did they know we were here? Webb, the blonde pack member said grimly. Before they got him, he must have sent word to the authorities. Insurance, in case things went wrong. Alexander looked around at his pack, at Jenny Morrison huddled against the wall, at the carnage surrounding them. His corporate empire, his supernatural authority, everything he'd built was about to come crashing down around him. Unless… Sophia, he said quietly, do you trust me? She looked into his golden eyes, seeing the man who'd held her with reverent gentleness, who'd sworn to claim her despite the consequences, who'd just risked everything to save an innocent woman's life. With everything I have. Alexander's smile was beautiful and dangerous all at once. Then it's time to find out just how good you are at spinning impossible situations into corporate victories. Chapter 5. The FBI tactical team that stormed the hunting lodge found a scene that would challenge their training manuals for decades to come. 8 dead or critically wounded mercenaries, a kidnapped woman freed from her restraints, and what appeared to be the aftermath of a corporate negotiation gone violently wrong. What they didn't find were any traces of the supernatural battle that had actually taken place. Alexander stood in the lodge's main room, his Armani suit somehow still pristine despite the carnage around him, speaking with calm authority to the lead FBI agent. His pack had vanished into the forest the moment they'd heard the helicopters, taking Marcus Webb with them to receive medical attention away from human scrutiny. The transformation from apex predator to billionaire CEO had been so seamless that even Sophia found herself doubting what she'd witnessed. Agent Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you that Miss Chen and I are here strictly in a corporate capacity. Alexander's voice carried that undertone of command that made people want to agree with him. When we received word that Miss Morrison had been kidnapped by parties interested in disrupting our business negotiations, we felt compelled to respond personally. Agent Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen everything the world had to offer, studied the scene with professional skepticism. Mr. Donovan, we have 8 armed men dead or dying, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. This wasn't a corporate negotiation. No, Sophia interjected smoothly, moving to stand beside Alexander. It was corporate espionage taken to its most extreme conclusion. She opened the briefcase she'd been carrying, revealing not just the Morrison Industries documents, but a collection of files she'd been preparing for the past week. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency as she spread the papers across an antique table that wasn't splattered with blood. Heinrich Kruger and his associates represent a consortium of European investors who've been attempting to acquire North American wilderness properties for development. Sophia's voice held the confidence of someone presenting to a boardroom full of skeptical executives. When legitimate acquisition attempts failed, they resorted to increasingly desperate measures. Agent Martinez picked up one of the documents, a financial analysis that showed suspicious money transfers between shell companies and offshore accounts. Sophia had worked until 3 a.m. fabricating the paper trail, but her attention to detail was flawless. You're saying this was about money? It's always about money, Agent Martinez. Alexander's smile held just the right amount of weary cynicism. The Blackwood project represents 3,000 acres of pristine forest that could be worth hundreds of millions to the right developers. When Kruger couldn't acquire it through normal channels, he decided to eliminate the competition. Jenny Morrison, who had been sitting quietly in the corner being examined by paramedics, spoke up with surprising steadiness. They kept asking about land deeds and development rights. They wanted my father to sign papers transferring ownership of something called mineral extraction rights. The lie was perfect, close enough to the truth to be believable, but carefully crafted to direct attention away from anything supernatural. Sophia felt a moment of admiration for Jenny's quick thinking under pressure. Agent Martinez studied the documents for several more minutes, her expression growing increasingly grim. Mr. Donovan, I'm going to need you and Miss Chen to come with us for formal statements. And Miss Morrison, we'll need to debrief you about your kidnapping experience. Of course, Alexander agreed readily. Though I hope you understand that Morrison Industries and Donovan Industries have legitimate business relationships that we'll need to protect during any investigation. The subtle threat was perfectly calibrated, cooperation offered freely, but with clear boundaries about what information would be shared. Agent Martinez nodded with the resignation of someone who dealt with powerful corporate interests before. 2 hours later, Sophia sat in an FBI interview room, her hands steady as she signed the final page of her official statement. Across the table, Agent Martinez reviewed the document with professional thoroughness. Miss Chen, your story is remarkably detailed for someone who is presumably in fear for her life. Fear makes some people panic, Agent Martinez. It makes others focus with absolute clarity. Sophia met the agent's gaze without flinching. I've spent my career in high-pressure negotiations. Kidnapping is just negotiation with higher stakes. Agent Martinez closed the file with a snap. You're free to go, Miss Chen. But don't leave the New York area without notifying us first. This investigation is far from over. Sophia gathered her things and walked out of the federal building into the pre-dawn darkness of Manhattan. The city never truly slept, but at 4 a.m, it dozed fitfully, streetlights creating pools of amber illumination, scattered taxis carrying the desperate or the wealthy to destinations that couldn't wait for daylight. Alexander was waiting for her beside his Porsche, looking impossibly elegant for someone who'd been questioned by federal agents for hours. When he saw her emerge from the building, his entire posture shifted, relief and possession warring across his features. How did it go? He asked, though his supernatural senses had probably told him everything he needed to know about her emotional state. They bought it. All of it. Sophia felt exhaustion hitting her like a wave now that the adrenaline was fading. The corporate espionage angle, the financial motivations, Jenny's testimony about development rights. As far as the FBI is concerned, this was a business dispute that escalated beyond all reason. Alexander pulled her into his arms, and Sophia melted against his chest despite being in full view of the federal building. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, could smell that intoxicating blend of expensive cologne and wild forest that was uniquely his. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. The way you constructed that cover story, managed the narrative, protected everyone involved. You saved my pack tonight, Sophia. She pulled back to look at him, seeing exhaustion and gratitude and something deeper burning in his golden eyes. Your packs saved themselves. I just gave them cover.
No.
Alexander's hands framed her face with that devastating gentleness she was coming to crave. You gave them a future. Without your quick thinking, we'd all be in federal custody right now, probably being dissected by government scientists who've been waiting their entire careers to prove that monsters are real. The weight of what she'd done, what they'd all done, settled over Sophia like a heavy blanket. She'd just lied to federal agents, constructed an elaborate corporate conspiracy to cover up a supernatural war, and helped multiple people evade prosecution for what was technically mass murder. I should be terrified, she said quietly. I should be running as far from you as possible. But all I can think about is whether your pack is safe, whether Marcus Webb is going to survive, and what happens next with the Blackwood Project. She laughed shakily. I think your world has officially become more real to me than my old one. Alexander's smile was radiant with relief and something that looked dangerously like love. Does that mean you're staying? Before Sophia could answer, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Gerald Morrison's name on the screen sent ice through her veins. After everything they'd been through, what crisis could possibly be emerging now? Gerald? Is everything all right? How's Jenny? She's fine. She's at the hospital being checked over. But Sophia? Gerald's voice was strange, tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. We have a problem. A big one. Alexander moved closer, close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. His expression had shifted back to corporate predator, ready to face whatever new threat was emerging. What kind of problem? The kind that involves Marcus Webb calling me from what sounds like a veterinary clinic, telling me that our entire corporate structure has been compromised by something called the Supernatural Regulatory Commission. Sophia's blood turned to ice. She looked at Alexander, seeing her own shock reflected in his golden eyes. The what? Apparently, there are government agencies that monitor and regulate supernatural activities in the corporate world. And according to Marcus, our merger with Donovan Industries has triggered a full investigation into what they're calling interspecies corporate manipulation. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's jaw had gone tight, his hands clenching into fists that looked capable of crushing steel. Around them, the pre-dawn city suddenly seemed full of shadows and threats. Gerald, Sophia said carefully, where exactly is Marcus Webb right now? That's the other problem. He says he's at something called the Crescent Moon Veterinary Hospital, but when I try to look it up, it doesn't exist. No business license, no address, no records of any kind. It's like the place is invisible. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they burned with fury and resignation. It exists. It's just not listed in human databases. What does that mean? Sophia asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. It means Marcus Webb is being treated at a supernatural medical facility, which means his injuries were severe enough to require inhuman healing methods. Alexander's voice had gone cold with rage. And it means every supernatural being in North America now knows that the Morrison Industries merger has drawn federal attention to PAC activities. Gerald's voice crackled through the phone. Sophia, there's more. Marcus says the Supernatural Regulatory Commission wants to meet with all parties involved in the merger tomorrow night. And if we don't comply, they'll shut down both companies and expose everything to the human authorities. Sophia felt the world tilting around her. Just when she'd thought they'd survived the worst of it, just when she'd begun to believe that Alexander's dual nature could coexist with her corporate ambitions, reality was reasserting itself with devastating force. Where do they want to meet? The Donovan Industries building. Top floor. Midnight tomorrow. Gerald's voice carried the weight of a man who'd aged years in a single night. Marcus says to bring lawyers, accountants, and anyone else we trust with our lives. Because after tomorrow night, nothing is ever going to be the same. Chapter 6. The 68th floor of Donovan Industries had been transformed into something resembling a corporate war room crossed with a supernatural summit. Alexander stood at the head of the massive conference table, his presence radiating the kind of authority that made world leaders take notes. But tonight, he wasn't just commanding a business empire, he was representing his species. Sophia sat to his right, her laptop open and financial documents spread across the polished mahogany surface. She'd spent the entire day preparing for a negotiation unlike anything in her professional experience, researching government regulations that didn't officially exist, and preparing arguments for laws that were never written down. The other attendees were a study in contrasts. Gerald Morrison sat pale and nervous at the far end of the table, still processing the revelation that werewolves were not only real but apparently regulated by shadowy government agencies. Jenny Morrison had insisted on attending despite her father's protests, her journalist's instincts telling her the story was too important to miss. Marcus Webb occupied a wheelchair position between two of Alexander's PAC members, his injuries still healing despite supernatural medical intervention. But it was the three figures who'd arrived at exactly midnight that commanded everyone's attention. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked like a university professor, steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and a charcoal suit that spoke of government budgets rather than corporate excess. But her eyes held an inhuman intelligence that made Sophia's skin prickle with primitive awareness. Director James Crawford was her opposite, a tall, imposing man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and an expression of polite interest that didn't hide the predatory calculation in his pale green eyes. The third member of their delegation was the most unsettling. Agent Sarah Kim appeared to be in her early 30s, Asian American, with the kind of understated beauty that belonged in fashion magazines. But there was something wrong with her movements, too fluid, too precise, as if she was consciously controlling every gesture to appear human. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Dr. Vasquez began, her voice carrying a slight accent that might have been Spanish. Though I should clarify that agreeing suggests you had a choice in the matter. Alexander's smile was all dangerous charm. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate directness in business negotiations. Perhaps you could explain exactly what authority you represent and why my corporate activities should be subject to your oversight. Director Crawford opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table. The Supernatural Regulatory Commission was established in 1952 under the Eisenhower administration, Mr. Donovan. Our mandate is to monitor and regulate supernatural activities that intersect with human society, particularly those involving significant financial or political influence. Sophia leaned forward to examine the documents, official-looking papers with government seals, legal language that seemed designed to grant unlimited authority while revealing nothing about actual limitations or oversight. These documents establish your authority to regulate supernatural beings, she said carefully, but they don't explain why you're interfering in a perfectly legal corporate merger between human-owned companies. Agent Kim spoke for the first time, her voice carrying undertones that made every supernatural being in the room tense with instinctive alarm. Because one of those companies isn't entirely human-owned, Miss Chen. And the merger you've negotiated involves the transfer of protected supernatural territory to an entity that's already under investigation for violations of the supernatural accords. Alexander's eyes flashed gold for just a moment. What violations? Unauthorized pack expansion, failure to report territorial disputes, and most seriously, the elimination of human assets without SRC approval. Dr. Vasquez's voice remained academically neutral, as if she were discussing statistical data rather than accusations of murder. The incident at the Blackwood Project resulted in 8 human casualties, Mr. Donovan. That requires explanation. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Sophia could feel the pack members around the table coiling for violence, could sense Alexander's careful control beginning to fray. This was the moment everything could fall apart. If the SRC decided to classify the Hunting Lodge incident as unsanctioned supernatural violence, they could destroy Alexander's corporate empire and scatter his pack to the winds. Agent Kim, Sophia said smoothly, I assume your investigation included a review of the FBI case files regarding the Blackwood incident. Of course. Then you're aware that the individuals killed were armed mercenaries engaged in kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder. The FBI has classified their deaths as justifiable homicide in defense of civilian lives. Sophia's voice carried the confidence of someone stating indisputable facts. Unless you're suggesting that supernatural beings should be held to different legal standards than human citizens? The question hung in the air, like a challenge. Director Crawford's expression revealed nothing, but Sophia caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested her argument had hit its target. The legal classification is irrelevant, Dr. Vasquez said finally. What matters is that Mr. Donovan's pack engaged in lethal combat with human forces without SRC authorization. Such actions destabilize the careful balance we've maintained between supernatural and human societies. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his posture deceptively relaxed. Dr. Vasquez, with all due respect, your careful balance nearly resulted in the extinction of my pack and the permanent loss of ancestral territory that's been protected for over 2 centuries. If your commission can't distinguish between aggression and self-defense, perhaps your oversight isn't as effective as you believe. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Agent Kim's eyes flashed with something that definitely wasn't human, while Director Crawford's smile revealed teeth that were slightly too sharp to be entirely natural. Careful, Alpha Donovan, Agent Kim purred, and her voice carried harmonics that made Sophia's bones ache. Challenging the authority of the SRC has consequences. As does threatening a legally operating corporate entity and its human associates, Sophia interjected, her tone crisp with professional authority. Agent Kim, I've reviewed the documents Director Crawford provided, and while they establish the SRC's authority to regulate supernatural activities, they also clearly state that such regulation cannot interfere with legitimate human business interests without due process. She pulled out her laptop and turned it to face the SRC delegation. I've prepared a detailed legal analysis of the Morrison-Donovan merger, including environmental impact studies, financial projections, and regulatory compliance documentation. Every aspect of this transaction falls within human legal frameworks and involves no supernatural activities that would trigger SRC jurisdiction. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward to study the screen, her inhuman eyes scanning through pages of data with supernatural speed. Very thorough, Miss Chen. Though I notice you've classified the Blackwood Project as a corporate retreat and environmental preservation initiative rather than acknowledging its significance as sacred pact territory. Because that's exactly what it is under human law, Sophia replied smoothly. Mr. Donovan's personal or cultural attachment to the property doesn't change its legal classification. The SRC has no more authority to regulate this merger than they would any other real estate transaction between human entities. Alexander watched the exchange with growing admiration. Sophia was fighting for his pack using weapons the SRC couldn't easily counter: human laws, corporate regulations, and bureaucratic procedures that even supernatural agencies had to respect. She was protecting his people by forcing their enemies to play by rules that favored human business interests. However, Director Crawford said quietly, Miss Chen has failed to address the most significant issue raised by this merger. All eyes turned to him, and his smile was cold enough to freeze blood. You, Miss Chen, are not entirely human anymore. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sophia felt her heart stutter, felt the color drain from her face as every person at the table turned to stare at her. I'm sorry, what? Agent Kim's smile was beautiful and terrible. Prolonged exposure to an alpha werewolf, particularly one you're romantically involved with, creates changes. Enhancements. Your reflexes are faster, your senses sharper, your healing accelerated. Blood tests would show hormonal and genetic markers that no longer fall within normal human parameters. Alexander's hand found hers under the table, his grip tight with desperate protectiveness. That's impossible. The mating bond doesn't work that way. Humans remain human unless they're deliberately turned, and that requires... Requires what, Mr. Donovan? Dr. Vasquez's voice was clinically curious. A bite during the full moon? Ancient rituals? Supernatural ceremonies? She laughed softly. Your knowledge of your own species' capabilities is surprisingly limited. Sophia felt the world spinning around her. She thought about the past few days, the way she'd been able to keep up with Alexander's supernatural speed, the clarity of her thoughts during crisis situations, the way her body had healed from minor injuries with unusual speed. Even if that were true, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, it doesn't change the legality of the merger. Enhanced humans still have the same legal rights as... Enhanced humans fall under SRC jurisdiction, Miss Chen. Agent Kim's voice was soft with false sympathy, which means this entire negotiation has been conducted under false pretenses. You've been representing supernatural interests while claiming human legal protections. The trap was closing around them with devastating precision. Sophia looked at Alexander, seeing her own desperation reflected in his golden eyes. They'd fought so hard to protect his pack, to reclaim his ancestral territory, to build a future that honored both their worlds. And now it was all crumbling because of changes in her own body that she didn't even fully understand. What do you want? Alexander asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. Director Crawford opened another file, revealing documents that would effectively end everything they'd fought for. Complete dissolution of the Morrison-Donovan merger. Transfer of the Blackwood Project to SRC custody for environmental protection. Relocation of your pack to designated territories in Alaska where your activities can be properly monitored. His pale eyes fixed on Sophia. And Miss Chen will submit to SRC evaluation and potential recruitment as a supernatural consultant. The offer hung in the air like a death sentence. Everything Alexander had built, everything his pack needed to survive, everything Sophia had worked for, all of it would disappear under the weight of bureaucratic control that answered to no human authority. But as Sophia stared at the documents that would destroy their lives, her enhanced mind began processing information with inhuman clarity. Details that had seemed unimportant suddenly formed a pattern, revealing possibilities that even the SRC hadn't considered. "Director Crawford," she said quietly, "before we agree to anything, I have one question about your authority to make these demands." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Miss Chen." Sophia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Exactly what species are you?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but the effect on the SRC delegation was immediate. Dr. Vasquez went very still. Agent Kim's eyes flashed with inhuman light, and Director Crawford's controlled expression flickered for just a moment. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance." "Because according to the documents you provided, the SRC was established to regulate supernatural beings, not to be governed by them." Sophia's voice carried new authority, her enhanced intellect processing connections at supernatural speed. "But if SRC leadership consists entirely of supernatural entities using their authority to control other species, then this entire organization represents exactly the kind of interspecies manipulation it claims to prevent." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at Sophia with something approaching awe, while the pack members around the table began to growl with renewed hope. Director Crawford's smile revealed fangs that were definitely not human. "Very good, Miss Chen. Though I'm afraid your insight comes too late to change anything." But Sophia was already reaching for her phone, already placing the call that would change everything. "Agent Martinez? This is Sophia Chen. I need to report a federal crime in progress." Chapter 7. The next 12 hours transformed Donovan Industries into the epicenter of a supernatural crisis that threatened to expose centuries of carefully hidden truths. FBI agents swarmed the building's lower floors while SRC operatives maintained their positions on the 68th floor, creating a standoff that had never been seen in the history of human supernatural relations. Sophia stood in Alexander's private office, watching federal agents establish a command center in the building's lobby through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing, reporters sensing a major story, government officials demanding answers, and corporate lawyers trying to understand how a simple merger had escalated into a federal investigation. "Agent Martinez is requesting access to the 68th floor," Alexander said, ending his latest call with barely controlled frustration. "The SRC is claiming federal jurisdiction supersedes FBI authority, and the FBI is claiming the SRC doesn't legally exist." "Because it doesn't," Sophia replied, her enhanced mind still processing the implications of everything they'd discovered. "The documents Crawford showed us are forgeries, sophisticated ones, but forgeries nonetheless. I've had 3 different legal experts examine the supposed Eisenhower-era legislation, and none of it appears in any official government records." Alexander moved to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders with possessive gentleness. Through their growing mate bond, Sophia could feel his emotional state, rage and protectiveness warring with something that felt dangerously like pride. "You're magnificent when you're destroying corrupt bureaucracies," he murmured against her ear, and despite everything, Sophia felt heat flood her veins. "We're not out of danger yet," she reminded him, though she leaned back against his chest. "Crawford and his people are still supernatural beings with significant resources and absolutely no legal oversight. If they decide we're too dangerous to leave alive, then they'll discover what happens when someone threatens my mate and my pack." Alexander's voice carried undertones that made the windows vibrate. "I didn't build this empire to watch it be destroyed by parasites who feed off fear." A knock on the office door interrupted them. Agent Martinez entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim with the weight of discoveries that challenged everything she thought she knew about law enforcement. "Mr. Donovan, Miss Chen, I need to ask you some very specific questions about the individuals calling themselves SRC representatives." Sophia turned in Alexander's arms, noting how the FBI agent's eyes tracked the intimate gesture with professional interest rather than surprise. Agent Martinez was clearly putting together a picture that included more than just corporate espionage. "What kind of questions?" Sophia asked. "The kind that involve federal databases showing no record of Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director James Crawford, or Agent Sarah Kim existing as real people." Martinez pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens of search results. No birth certificates, no social security numbers, no educational records, no employment history. They're ghosts. Alexander's hands tightened on Sophia's shoulders. Or they're using identities that don't require human documentation. Agent Martinez's sharp eyes fixed on his face. Mr. Donovan, I've been a federal agent for 15 years. I've seen organized crime, international espionage, domestic terrorism, and corporate corruption that would make your head spin. But I've never seen anything like what's happening in this building. She moved to the windows, staring down at the chaos in the lobby. 3 hours ago, I watched Agent Kim move faster than humanly possible to disarm one of my officers. Dr. Vasquez just finished reading a 1,000-page financial document in less than 10 minutes. And Director Crawford. She paused, as if struggling to find words for what she'd witnessed. What about Crawford? Sophia asked quietly. Crawford stopped a conference room door from closing by grabbing it with his bare hand. The door is steel-reinforced, electronically controlled, and designed to resist forced entry. He stopped it like it was made of paper. Martinez turned back to face them. So, I'm going to ask you again, what exactly am I dealing with here? The moment of truth hung in the air between them. Sophia could feel Alexander weighing options, calculating risks, trying to find a path that protected his pack without exposing them to government persecution. But she could also feel something else through their bond, trust. He was leaving the decision to her. Agent Martinez, Sophia said carefully, if I told you that some people aren't entirely human, how would you respond? The federal agent was quiet for a long moment, studying both of their faces with the intensity of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled. 6 months ago, I would have recommended psychological evaluation for anyone making that claim, she said finally. Today, after everything I've witnessed, I'd ask for proof and hope you can provide it. Alexander stepped forward, and Sophia felt his decision through their mate bond before he spoke. Agent Martinez, what I'm about to show you is classified at levels that don't officially exist. If you're not prepared to have your understanding of reality permanently altered, you should leave this room right now. Instead of retreating, Agent Martinez moved closer. Show me. Alexander's transformation was more controlled this time, less explosive violence, more demonstration of supernatural capability. His features shifted gradually, revealing the predatory aspects of his dual nature without losing his essential humanity. When the change was complete, a being that was part man and part apex predator stood in the middle of his corporate office, golden eyes burning with ancient authority. Agent Martinez stared at him for nearly a full minute, her hand resting unconsciously on her service weapon but making no move to draw it. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady with professional calm. Werewolf. Among other things, Alexander replied, his voice distorted but understandable. Alpha of the largest pack on the East Coast, CEO of a $12 billion corporate empire, and according to recent DNA analysis, no longer entirely bound by human law. He shifted back to human form, the transformation fluid and natural. Agent Martinez watched every detail with the focused attention of someone adding new categories to her understanding of possible threats. The SRC representatives, she said slowly, they're also not human? Dr. Vasquez is a vampire, Sophia answered. Probably old enough to remember when the Eisenhower administration was actually in power. Agent Kim appears to be some kind of shapeshifter, possibly a fox spirit based on her movement patterns. Director Crawford. She paused, thinking. I'm not sure. Something that feeds on authority and control, maybe a demon of some kind. And they've been impersonating federal agents to extort money and territory from supernatural beings. Agent Martinez's voice carried the cold fury of someone whose badge had been used to legitimize crimes. That's federal impersonation, extortion, kidnapping, and probably a dozen other charges I haven't thought of yet. Alexander's smile was razor-sharp with anticipation. Agent Martinez, I believe we have a basis for cooperation that serves both human and supernatural interests. Before anyone could respond, the building's emergency alert system activated. Red lights flashed throughout the office as a computerized voice announced, "Security breach on floor 68. All personnel evacuate immediately." This is not a drill. Through the office windows, Sophia could see chaos erupting in the streets below. Government vehicles were racing away from the building, federal agents were running for cover, and something that looked like black smoke was pouring from the upper floors. "They're making their move," Alexander growled, his eyes already shifting to gold. Crawford must have decided that negotiation isn't going to work. Agent Martinez was speaking rapidly into her radio, coordinating evacuation procedures while trying to understand a threat unlike anything in FBI protocols. "All units, maintain safe distance from the Donovan building. Possible chemical or biological hazard in progress." "It's not chemical," Sophia said quietly, her enhanced senses picking up traces of something that smelled like sulfur and old graves. "It's supernatural." Crawford's dropping his human disguise. The lights in Alexander's office flickered and died, plunging them into darkness relieved only by the emergency lighting in the hallway. Through the mate bond, Sophia could feel Alexander's pack responding to his unspoken call. Supernatural predators moving through the building's ventilation systems and service corridors, converging on the 68th floor like antibodies responding to infection. "Miss Chen," Agent Martinez said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest."
"What?"
"Are you still human enough to be protected by federal law?" The question cut to the heart of everything Sophia had been avoiding since Agent Kim's revelation. She could feel the changes in her body. Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, senses that picked up details no human should notice. But more than that, she could feel the growing connection to Alexander's pack, the way their supernatural nature called to something awakening in her own genetic code. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know I'm human enough to choose which side I'm on." Alexander's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip warm and reassuring. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Agent Martinez's radio crackled with urgent updates. "Command, we have multiple contacts moving through the building's upper floors. Speed and coordination suggest military training, but movement patterns are unusual." "Unusual how?" Martinez responded. "They're moving on walls and ceilings, Command. Whatever these people are, they're not following normal human limitations." Sophia felt Alexander's pack members getting closer, felt their predatory excitement as they prepared to defend their alpha and reclaim their territory. But she also felt something else, a presence moving through the building that was far older and more dangerous than werewolves. "Alexander," she whispered urgently, "Crawford isn't just dropping his disguise. He's calling in reinforcements." Through the emergency lighting, she could see Alexander's expression hardening with grim determination. Then it's time Crawford learned what happens when someone declares war on a pack alpha in his own territory. The elevator at the far end of the hallway dinged softly, its doors opening to reveal figures that no longer bothered to maintain human appearances. Dr. Vasquez stepped out first, her academic facade replaced by something that belonged in Gothic nightmares: pale skin, eyes like burning coals, and fangs that caught the emergency lighting like polished steel. Agent Kim followed, but she was no longer the beautiful government officer who'd entered the building hours earlier. Her form shifted and flowed like liquid shadow, sometimes appearing human, sometimes revealing glimpses of something with too many teeth and claws that could tear through steel. But it was Director Crawford who made Sophia's blood turn to ice. The thing that had been impersonating a federal official was tall enough to scrape the ceiling, its flesh the color of old bone, its eyes burning with fires that had never known mortal limitations. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of authority stolen from 1,000 different sources. "Alpha Donovan," Crawford said, and his words seemed to echo from multiple directions simultaneously. "You've caused us considerable inconvenience. We had hoped to resolve this matter through negotiation, but you've forced our hand." Alexander stepped forward, placing himself between Sophia and the approaching threats. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 15 years spent building an empire and 2 centuries of alpha bloodline. "Crawford, you made a critical error when you threatened what belongs to me. This building is my territory. This city respects my authority. And the woman behind me is my mate." His eyes blazed with golden fire as his human facade began to crack. "You picked a fight with the wrong predator." Crawford's laugh was the sound of breaking glass and dying hopes. Predator? Child, I was feeding on the fears of your ancestors when your bloodline was still learning to walk upright. You think corporate success and pack loyalty make you dangerous? You have no idea what true power looks like. But before Crawford could advance another step, the building's sound system crackled to life with Agent Martinez's voice. Attention all supernatural entities currently in the Donovan Industries building. This is Agent Martinez, FBI. You are surrounded by federal agents, local law enforcement, and military assets. You have 60 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate exactly what human weapons can do to creatures that think they're above human law. The effect on Crawford's delegation was immediate. Dr. Vasquez hissed like an angry cat. Agent Kim's form solidified into something defensive, and Crawford himself paused with genuine surprise. Impossible, he snarled. Humans don't have weapons that can. His words were cut off by the distinctive sound of military helicopters approaching the building. Through the windows, Sophia could see searchlights blazing against the glass, but these weren't ordinary aircraft. The helicopters moved with precision that suggested pilot skills beyond normal human capability, and she could swear she saw figures rappelling down from them that moved with inhuman grace. Agent Martinez, Alexander said quietly, please tell me you didn't call in supernatural military support. Martinez's voice carried grim satisfaction through the building's intercom system. Mr. Donovan, when I realized I was dealing with beings that could tear apart steel doors and move faster than human reflexes, I contacted the only federal agency equipped to handle supernatural threats. Allow me to introduce Task Force Cerberus, the government's official supernatural response unit. Crawford's roar of rage shook the entire building, but it was too late. The trap that had been meant to destroy Alexander's pack had become a web that caught far more dangerous prey. As figures in advanced tactical gear began moving through the building's upper floors, Sophia realized that the secret war between human and supernatural authorities was about to become very public indeed. And standing in the middle of it all, Alexander Donovan faced the most important choice of his life: trust in the human institutions he'd spent decades learning to manipulate, or rely on the pack bonds that had sustained his people for centuries. The decision would determine not just his own fate, but the future of every supernatural being trying to exist in a world that was rapidly running out of shadows to hide in. Chapter 8. Task Force Cerberus moved through the Donovan Industries building like supernatural warfare distilled into tactical precision. Sophia watched through security monitors as figures in advanced combat gear flowed up stairwells and through corridors with coordination that defied human limitations. Whatever Agent Martinez had summoned, it was clear that the U.S. government had been preparing for supernatural conflicts far longer than anyone realized. Alexander stood beside her in his office's command center, his corporate sanctuary transformed into a war room that would have impressed Pentagon strategists. Multiple screens showed feeds from throughout the building, while encrypted communication channels carried reports from his pack members and federal agents alike. Alpha, came the voice of his pack's lieutenant through secured comms. We've got eyes on the Cerberus team. They're not entirely human, but they're not hostile to pack members. Possible enhanced humans or voluntary supernatural recruits. Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sophia could feel his relief through their mate bond. Whatever Cerberus was, they weren't treating his pack as enemy combatants. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Donovan, Miss Chen, I need you to remain in your current location. Cerberus Command wants to debrief you both once we have the SRC operatives in custody. Copy that, Alexander replied, then muted the comm channel. Sophia, whatever happens next, I need you to understand something important. She turned from the monitors to face him, noting how the emergency lighting cast dramatic shadows across his sharp features. Even in crisis, Alexander Donovan commanded attention like gravity itself. What is it? Task Force Cerberus isn't rescue, it's evaluation. His golden eyes held grim certainty. They're here to determine whether supernatural beings can coexist with human society, or whether we represent a threat that needs to be eliminated. The implication sent ice through Sophia's veins. And if they decide we're too dangerous? Then tonight becomes the opening battle of a war that could destroy both our species. Through the security monitors, they watched Cerberus operatives corner Dr. Vasquez in the building's executive conference room. The vampire moved with inhuman speed, but her attackers matched her velocity with military precision. When silver mesh nets deployed from their weapons, she was brought down with efficiency that spoke of extensive supernatural combat training. Agent Kim lasted longer, her shape-shifting abilities allowing her to flow through ventilation systems and emerge behind enemy positions. But Cerberus had anticipated supernatural mobility. Their weapons fired some kind of energy rounds that disrupted her transformations, forcing her back into solid form where conventional restraints could hold her. It was Director Crawford who provided the real test of Cerberus' capabilities. The creature that had been masquerading as federal authority unleashed power that shattered reinforced windows and cracked structural supports. When it spoke, its voice carried compulsion that made several Cerberus operatives freeze mid-motion. But Task Force Cerberus had come prepared for supernatural mind control. Advanced helmet systems protected their personnel from psychic influence, while their weapons fired rounds that seemed designed specifically for entities that drew power from fear and dominance. Crawford's roars of rage echoed through the building as they systematically stripped away his stolen authority. "Impressive," Alexander murmured, watching the tactical feeds. "Though I'm curious about the technology they're using. Those energy weapons aren't standard military issue." Sophia's enhanced intellect was processing details at supernatural speed, noting tactical patterns and equipment specifications that suggested years of development. "This isn't new, Alexander. Cerberus has been preparing for supernatural conflicts for decades. The question is whether they see us as potential allies or future targets." Before Alexander could respond, his office doors opened to admit figures that redefined Sophia's understanding of government black ops. The Cerberus team leader was a woman who might have been 30 or 50, ageless in a way that suggested supernatural enhancement rather than excellent genetics. Her tactical gear incorporated technology that seemed decades ahead of anything Sophia had seen, and her eyes held intelligence that was definitely enhanced beyond human norms. "Mr. Donovan, Miss Chen, I'm Commander Sarah Cross, Task Force Cerberus." Her voice carried authority that rivaled Alexander's own. "We need to discuss your situation before this escalates beyond anyone's ability to control." Alexander remained seated behind his desk, projecting corporate power despite the chaos surrounding them. "Commander Cross, I appreciate your intervention, but I'd like to understand exactly what authority Cerberus operates under." "The kind that doesn't appear in public records or congressional budgets," Cross replied with a slight smile. "We're the government response to threats that officially don't exist." She moved to the windows, studying the federal agents and emergency responders still maintaining perimeter security around the building. The SRC has been operating as a parasitic organization for over 60 years, exploiting supernatural beings while claiming federal authority they never possessed. Tonight's action eliminates a threat that could have destabilized human-supernatural relations permanently. Sophia leaned forward, her lawyer's instincts engaging despite the surreal circumstances. "Commander, what's Cerberus's position on legitimate supernatural beings who aren't involved in criminal activities?" Cross turned back to face them, and her expression revealed genuine respect rather than bureaucratic calculation. "That depends entirely on whether those beings can demonstrate that coexistence benefits both species." "And how exactly does one demonstrate that?" Alexander asked quietly. "By proving that supernatural capabilities can serve human interests without compromising human security." Cross pulled out a tablet, swiping through files that contained information about Alexander's corporate empire, his PAC's activities, and details about Sophia's role in recent events. "Your merger with Morrison Industries, your corporate success, your protection of human associates during supernatural conflicts, all of it suggests potential for positive integration." Sophia felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest. "So you're not here to arrest us, or shut down Alexander's operations? We're here to offer you a choice." Cross set the tablet on Alexander's desk, revealing documents that would change everything. Full legal recognition as enhanced humans with supernatural capabilities, government protection for your pack and territory, and official consulting contracts that would make you valuable assets rather than potential threats. Alexander studied the documents with predatory intensity, his enhanced senses probably detecting details about ink composition and paper authenticity that would escape human notice. When he looked up, his expression was carefully neutral. And in exchange, you help us identify and eliminate rogue supernatural entities that threaten human society. You provide consultation on supernatural matters that affect national security. And you serve as proof that human and supernatural interests can align rather than conflict. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to drowning survivors. Everything Alexander had built, everything his pack needed to survive, everything Sophia had risked to help them achieve, all of it could be legitimized, protected, and expanded under government authority. But Sophia could feel Alexander's hesitation through their mate bond. This was a man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd never accepted help without understanding the true cost. Government partnerships, no matter how beneficial they appeared, always came with strings attached. Commander Cross, Sophia said carefully, what happens to supernatural beings who decline your offer? Cross's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. That depends on whether they decline politely or whether they represent ongoing threats to public safety. The implicit threat was clear: cooperation or elimination. Sophia looked at Alexander, seeing her own understanding reflected in his golden eyes. They weren't being offered partnership so much as conscription into a system that would use their abilities while ensuring their loyalty. I need guarantees, Alexander said finally. Full territorial rights to the Blackwood Project, legal protection for every member of my pack, and absolute autonomy in internal pack matters that don't affect human interests. Done. Cross didn't even hesitate. Though I should mention that your pack isn't the only supernatural group we're working with. Integration is becoming a matter of national security rather than personal choice. She gestured toward the windows, where the chaos of emergency responders was beginning to organize into something more systematic. The world is changing, Mr. Donovan. Supernatural capabilities are becoming too useful to ignore and too dangerous to leave unregulated. The question is whether beings like you will help shape that change or be shaped by it. Alexander stood slowly, his corporate authority reasserting itself as he processed the implications of Cross's offer. When he extended his hand, it was with the confidence of someone sealing a deal that would benefit all parties involved. Commander Cross, you have yourself a consulting contract. But as they shook hands, Sophia caught something in Cross's expression that made her enhanced senses prickle with unease. The Cerberus commander was satisfied, too satisfied for someone who'd just negotiated with a powerful alpha werewolf. Excellent, Cross said. Though I should mention one additional detail about your new status as government consultants. What detail? Sophia asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Cross's smile revealed teeth that were slightly too sharp to be entirely human. Welcome to Task Force Cerberus, Mr. Donovan. Your first assignment begins immediately. The trap had been perfectly baited, offering everything they needed while ensuring they became exactly what the government required. As federal agents began securing the building and processing the captured SRC operatives, Sophia realized that their war for freedom had just become conscription into a conflict far larger and more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. But looking at Alexander, at the man who'd claimed her as his mate, who'd risked everything to reclaim his pack's sacred territory, who'd transformed corporate ambition into supernatural authority, she found herself smiling. If the government wanted to weaponize their love story, they were about to discover that some bonds were stronger than any attempt to control them. Chapter 9. 6 months after the Cerberus incident, the Blackwood Project had been transformed from contested territory into something unprecedented in supernatural history, a fully operational corporate retreat that served dual purposes as pack sanctuary and government research facility. Sophia stood on the wraparound porch of the newly renovated hunting lodge, watching Alexander emerge from the forest in his wolf form, his pack flanking him like shadows made flesh. The sight never failed to take her breath away. Alexander in his supernatural form was magnificent, larger than any natural wolf, his dark fur gleaming with health and power, golden eyes burning with intelligence that was purely his own. When he shifted back to human form at the forest's edge, his naked body moving with predatory grace as he pulled on clothes that had been left strategically positioned, Sophia felt heat flood her veins despite 6 months of marriage. "Mrs. Donovan," came a familiar voice behind her, "your husband's punctuality continues to impress our government observers." Sophia turned to find Commander Cross approaching across the lodge's main deck, her Cerberus uniform exchanged for casual civilian clothing that didn't quite hide the tactical gear underneath. In the months since their forced partnership had begun, Cross had become something approaching a friend, if friends were government operatives who could eliminate you without paperwork. "Sarah," Sophia replied, using the commander's first name with a familiarity they developed through dozens of supernatural crisis situations. "How did the perimeter assessment go?" "Your husband's pack has turned 3,000 acres of wilderness into the most secure supernatural facility in North America." Cross accepted the cup of coffee Sophia offered, settling into one of the deck chairs that had been positioned to overlook both the forest and the lake. Motion sensors disguised as natural rock formations sent markers that would warn of intrusion from miles away and patrol patterns that would impress Pentagon strategists. Alexander appeared on the deck steps, his shirt still unbuttoned and his hair tousled from the transformation. 6 months of government consulting work had honed his already impressive physique into something that belonged in Renaissance sculptures, and Sophia felt her pulse accelerate as he moved to stand behind her chair. "Commander," he said, his hands settling possessively on Sophia's shoulders. "I trust the inspection meets your standards?" "It exceeds them," Cross admitted. "Though I have to ask, is the security for the government research facilities, or are you preparing for something specific?" Alexander's hands tightened slightly on Sophia's shoulders, and through their mate bond, she could feel his emotional state shifting toward protective alertness. Over the months, they'd both learned to read the subtle signs that preceded supernatural crises. "Both," Alexander said finally. "The research facilities need protection from external threats. But we've been monitoring increased supernatural activity along the East Coast, and patterns suggest someone is testing territorial boundaries." Cross set down her coffee with the kind of careful precision that meant bad news was coming. "That's actually why I'm here. Cerberus has identified a problem that requires your specific expertise." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through files that contained photographs and intelligence reports. "Over the past month, we've had 17 supernatural disappearances spanning from Maine to North Carolina. All of them were powerful individuals, pack alphas, vampire lords, Fey nobility. No bodies, no ransom demands, no territorial disputes that would explain coordinated kidnappings." Sophia studied the photographs, her enhanced intellect processing details that painted a disturbing picture. "These aren't random targets. Someone is specifically hunting supernatural leadership." "Our analysis suggests the same conclusion," Cross agreed. "But here's where it gets interesting. In every case, the disappearances occurred after the individuals had contact with Cerberus or agreed to government partnerships." The implication hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sophia felt his fury through their mate bond, saw his eyes flash gold as his control wavered. "You think someone is targeting supernaturals who cooperate with the government?" "I think someone is eliminating potential allies before a larger conflict begins." Cross's expression was grim with professional concern. "And based on the sophistication required to capture beings of this caliber, we're dealing with an organization that has resources rivaling our own." Alexander began pacing the deck with predatory restlessness, his mind clearly working through tactical implications. "How many government-affiliated supernaturals are we talking about total?" 47 individuals or groups across 12 states, all with consulting contracts similar to yours." Cross paused, letting the numbers sink in. "If someone is systematically eliminating supernatural allies, you and your pack are high-priority targets." Sophia felt ice flood her veins. The peaceful months at Blackwood, the corporate success of the Morrison-Donovan merger, the government protection that had seemed like salvation, all of it could disappear if Alexander became another casualty in whatever war was brewing. "What kind of protection can Cerberus provide?" she asked. "Limited," Cross admitted with obvious frustration. The disappearances have been too clean, too professional. No evidence, no witnesses, no patterns we can predict or defend against. Whoever is behind this has been studying our methods as carefully as they've been studying supernatural capabilities. Alexander stopped pacing to stand at the deck's railing, staring out at the forest that had become sanctuary for his pack. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that would affect everyone he protected. "Commander, I need complete files on every disappeared supernatural. Locations, timing, last known activities, any Cerberus contact protocols they followed." His golden eyes fixed on Cross with alpha intensity. "If someone is hunting us, I want to understand exactly how they're doing it." "Alexander," Sophia said quietly, "what are you thinking?" He turned to face her, and his expression held the same dangerous calculation she'd first seen in his boardroom almost a year ago. "I'm thinking that whoever is behind this made a critical error. Which is, they're hunting pack leaders who've been isolated by government partnerships, cut off from their traditional supernatural support networks." Alexander's smile was pure predator recognizing prey. But they've never faced a pack alpha who built a corporate empire before accepting government contracts. Our resources aren't limited to Cerberus protocols. Cross leaned forward with interest. "What are you proposing?" "A trap." Alexander's eyes blazed with tactical brilliance. "But not the kind they'll expect. Instead of hiding behind government protection, we're going to use corporate channels to expose their operation. Sophia, how quickly can you arrange a supernatural business summit?" Sophia's enhanced intellect immediately grasped the implications of his plan. "You want to gather high-value targets in one location to draw them out?" "I want to gather high-value targets who are also sophisticated enough to recognize and counter whatever methods these hunters are using." Alexander moved to stand beside her chair, his hand finding hers with reassuring strength. "A summit of supernatural leaders who've successfully integrated with human business and government structures. If someone wants to eliminate supernatural cooperation, we'll force them to attack when we're prepared instead of picking off isolated individuals." Cross was already running calculations on her tablet. The security requirements alone would be staggering. "And the risk is manageable if we control every variable," Sophia interrupted, her corporate strategist instincts engaging. "We hold it here at Blackwood, on territory Alexander's pack has spent months securing. We invite only supernatural leaders with proven track records of human cooperation. And we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of trap they're walking into." Alexander squeezed her hand, and through their mate bond, Sophia felt his fierce approval of her tactical thinking. Voluntary bait, with full disclosure and overwhelming defensive advantages. "You're talking about turning a business summit into a supernatural war council," Cross observed. "I'm talking about turning a supernatural war council into a business summit," Alexander corrected. "Because the best way to defeat an enemy that studies supernatural capabilities is to use methods they haven't prepared for." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and exactly the kind of calculated risk that had built Alexander's corporate empire. But as Sophia looked at the forest that had become their sanctuary, at the pack members who depended on Alexander's protection, at the government alliance that could either save or doom them all, she realized they didn't have a choice. Someone was hunting supernatural leaders who dared to cooperate with human authority. The question was whether they could turn that hunt into a trap that would protect everyone they cared about. "Sarah," Sophia said to Cross, "how much authority does Cerberus have to support operations that aren't strictly defensive?" Cross's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Mrs. Donovan, when it comes to eliminating threats to supernatural human cooperation, Cerberus has whatever authority the situation requires." 3 hours later, invitations began arriving in the private communications networks of supernatural leaders across North America. The message was elegant in its simplicity. "The Blackwood Corporate Retreat cordially invites you to attend the first annual Supernatural Integration Summit. Topics will include government cooperation strategies, corporate partnership development, and coordinated responses to emerging threats against our communities. Location: Blackwood Project, New York. Duration: 3 days. Security: absolute. Please note, This summit is specifically designed to address systematic threats against supernatural leaders who cooperate with human authorities. Attendance constitutes acknowledgement that participants may be targeted by hostile entities and that defensive measures will be employed accordingly. RSVP required. Corporate attire recommended. Bring your own backup. By sunset, 43 confirmations had arrived. The trap was set, the bait was prepared, and whatever had been hunting supernatural leaders was about to discover that some prey fought back with interest rates and corporate merger strategies. Alexander stood at their bedroom window that night, watching his pack maintain perimeter security around the lodge that had become their fortress. Sophia moved to stand beside him, her silk nightgown a stark contrast to the tactical preparations occurring throughout their territory. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. "Third and fourth thoughts," Alexander admitted, pulling her against his chest. "We're gambling everything on the assumption that whoever is behind the disappearances will take the bait. And if they don't..." Alexander's arms tightened around her, and Sophia could feel his protective instincts warring with his tactical calculations. "Then we've just gathered 43 of the most powerful supernatural beings in North America in one location with no immediate threat to justify the risk." Sophia tilted her head back to look at his face, seeing the weight of leadership etched in the lines around his golden eyes. "Alexander, do you trust me?" "With everything I am." "Then trust me when I say that whoever is hunting supernatural leaders has never faced someone who built a corporate empire by identifying and eliminating systemic threats to market stability." She turned in his arms, bringing their bodies flush together. "We're not just setting a trap, love. We're about to demonstrate why supernatural beings who understand human systems are far more dangerous than traditional predators." Alexander's smile was beautiful and terrible all at once. "Remind me never to bet against you in corporate negotiations." "Too late for that," Sophia purred against his lips. "You already signed a lifetime contract." As they kissed in the window of their fortress, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the forest's edge, someone who had been studying their defenses, their patterns, their weaknesses for months. Someone who understood exactly what kind of trap they were setting, and who had been preparing a countertrap of their own. The first annual Supernatural Integration Summit was still 3 days away, but the real game had already begun. Chapter 10. The morning of the summit dawned crisp and clear, with early autumn painting the Blackwood forest in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost supernaturally vibrant. Sophia stood in the lodge's renovated great room, supervising final preparations for an event unlike anything in recorded supernatural history. The space had been transformed from rustic hunting lodge to corporate conference center, complete with state-of-the-art presentation equipment, secure communication systems, and seating arrangements that accounted for territorial sensitivities between different supernatural species. Mrs. Donovan, called James Morrison, Gerald's nephew and the new CEO of Morrison Industries, as he approached with a tablet full of logistical concerns. "The catering staff is asking about dietary restrictions. Apparently, some of our guests have unusual requirements." Sophia glanced at the list, noting requests that ranged from rare steak served at body temperature to floral arrangements that definitely weren't meant for decoration. 6 months, as the wife of an alpha werewolf, had prepared her for supernatural quirks, but coordinating a multi-species business summit was testing even her enhanced organizational skills. "Tell the caterers that dietary needs are non-negotiable and discretion is absolute," she replied. "And James? The staff should avoid making eye contact with anyone whose reflection doesn't appear in the mirrors." James nodded with the determined professionalism of someone who'd learned not to question the stranger aspects of his family's new business partnerships. The Morrison-Donovan merger had been fantastically successful, partly because both families now understood that some clients required accommodations that didn't appear in standard hospitality guides. Alexander emerged from the security command center that had been established in the lodge's basement, his expression carrying the focused intensity of someone coordinating defense strategies with military precision. He'd traded his usual corporate attire for tactical clothing that managed to look both professional and ready for combat. Dark slacks, a fitted black sweater that emphasized his powerful build, and boots that could transition from boardroom to battlefield without missing a step. Perimeter teams report all clear, he said, moving to stand beside Sophia with possessive awareness of her position as both his mate and the summit's primary coordinator. First arrivals should begin within the hour. Through the great room's windows, Sophia could see members of Alexander's pack positioned throughout the forest in human form, their casual attire hiding the fact that they were armed with both conventional weapons and supernatural capabilities. Cerberus operatives had integrated seamlessly with the pack's defensive positions, creating overlapping security zones that would challenge any force foolish enough to attack during the summit. Any changes to the threat assessment? Sophia asked, though she could feel Alexander's emotional state through their mate bond and already knew the answer would be concerning. 3 more disappearances in the past week, Alexander replied quietly. A vampire council leader in Boston, a Fey lord from the Philadelphia area, and a pack alpha from Delaware. All of them had confirmed attendance at our summit. The implications sent ice through Sophia's veins. Someone wasn't just hunting supernatural leaders. They were specifically targeting individuals who'd planned to attend the integration summit, which meant their trap had been detected, analyzed, and turned against them. How many confirmed attendees do we still have? She asked. Alexander's expression was grim. 37. Down from 43 original confirmations. Before Sophia could respond, the lodge's advanced security system chimed with an arrival notification. Through the monitors connected to hidden cameras throughout the property, they watched a convoy of black vehicles approaching along the forest road, 3 SUVs with tinted windows and coordination that suggested military or government transport. First arrival, Alexander murmured, but his tone carried wariness rather than welcome. The lead vehicle stopped in the circular driveway, and a figure emerged that redefined Sophia's understanding of supernatural dignity. Victoria Ashworth appeared to be in her 40s, with platinum blonde hair styled in an elegant chignon and a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. But it was her movement that revealed her true nature. Too fluid, too graceful, with a kind of predatory awareness that came from centuries of survival as an apex predator. Lady Ashworth, Alexander said with genuine respect as they met her at the lodge's front entrance. Thank you for attending despite the recent security concerns. Victoria's smile revealed teeth that were slightly too sharp and eyes that held intelligence, spanning multiple lifetimes. Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Donovan, I wouldn't miss the opportunity to meet the Alpha, who convinced the human government that supernatural beings could be valuable allies rather than existential threats. She extended her hand to Sophia, and the contact sent a chill up her arm that had nothing to do with temperature. Though I must say, your reputation for turning impossible situations into corporate victories is quite impressive, even among beings who've seen empires rise and fall. Lady Ashworth, Sophia replied, maintaining professional composure despite every instinct warning her that she was in the presence of something far older and more dangerous than any corporate adversary. We're honored to have someone of your experience participate in our discussions about human supernatural cooperation. Victoria's laugh was like silver bells wrapped around a blade. My dear, I've been manipulating human governments since before your country existed. The real question is whether your government is prepared to handle the kind of cooperation supernatural beings are capable of providing. Over the next 2 hours, the lodge filled with arrivals that could have been mistaken for a Fortune 500 corporate retreat if not for the subtle details that revealed their true nature. Marcus Thornfield, a Fey lord whose business suit couldn't quite hide the otherworldly beauty that made humans stumble over their words. Chun Weiming, who appeared to be a successful tech entrepreneur until you noticed that his shadow moved independently of his body. Sarah Blackwater, whose corporate credentials were impeccable and whose eyes held the depth of someone who'd spent centuries beneath ocean waves. Each arrival brought new layers of complexity to the security arrangements. Territorial boundaries had to be respected, dietary requirements became increasingly exotic, and the sheer concentration of supernatural power in one location began affecting the lodge's electronic systems in ways that required constant technical adjustments. But it was the final arrival that made Alexander's entire posture shift into combat readiness. A single black sedan approached the lodge just as the sun reached its zenith, and the figure who emerged made every supernatural being present go completely still with recognition. Dmitry Volkov looked like a successful Russian businessman. Expensive suit, perfectly groomed appearance, and the kind of confident bearing that came from never doubting your own authority. But the aura of menace that surrounded him was so intense that even the enhanced humans present felt primitive warnings screaming through their nervous systems. "Volkov," Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that made windows vibrate. "I wasn't certain you'd accept the invitation." The Russian's smile revealed fangs that belonged in nightmares. "Alpha Donovan, when someone extends an invitation to discuss the systematic elimination of supernatural leadership, one either attends or assumes they're next on the list." He moved toward the lodge entrance with predatory grace, pausing to study Sophia with interest that made her skin crawl. And this must be the human who convinced an alpha werewolf that government cooperation was preferable to traditional pack independence. "Fascinating. Mrs. Donovan," Alexander said with emphasis on her title, his protective instincts clearly engaged. "Mr. Volkov represents certain Eastern European interests that specialize in conflict resolution." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't hide what Volkov actually was, a supernatural enforcer whose reputation for violence had made him legend among beings who were already monsters. His presence at a summit dedicated to peaceful cooperation was like bringing a nuclear weapon to trade negotiations. "Indeed," Volkov agreed, his accent adding gravitas to words that carried implied threats. "Though I must admit, I'm curious to see whether American supernatural beings have grown soft under government protection, or whether they've simply learned more subtle forms of warfare." Before anyone could respond to the challenge, Commander Cross's voice crackled through Alexander's earpiece. "Alpha, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple aircraft approaching from different vectors. Military formation, electronic countermeasures active, ETA approximately 15 minutes. Alexander's eyes flashed gold as his supernatural senses engaged, and Sophia felt his alarm through their mate bond like a physical blow. Around the lodge, other supernatural beings were reacting to threats their enhanced senses detected. Victoria Ashworth's perfect composure cracking slightly, Marcus Thornfield's otherworldly beauty sharpening into something dangerous, Chen Weiming's shadow beginning to writhe with independent life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said with a kind of calm authority that came from years of crisis management, "it appears our summit is about to become more interactive than planned." Sophia felt her enhanced intellect shifting into tactical mode, processing possibilities and probabilities within human speed. The timing was too perfect, the coordination too sophisticated. Someone had been monitoring their preparations, tracking their security measures, waiting for the exact moment when 47 of North America's most powerful supernatural beings would be gathered in one location. "This was never about hunting individual leaders," she said quietly, the realization hitting her like lightning. "This was about gathering us all together so we could be eliminated simultaneously." Alexander's smile was beautiful and terrible all at once. "Then whoever planned this is about to learn why you never trap a pack alpha in his own territory, especially what his mate is the woman who turned corporate mergers into supernatural warfare." As the first aircraft appeared on the horizon, Sophia realized that the first annual Supernatural Integration Summit was about to become the supernatural conflict that would determine whether human and inhuman beings could coexist, or whether one species would destroy the other in their struggle for dominance. The war for the future had finally begun, and it was starting in their living room. Chapter 11. The attack began with electromagnetic pulses that killed every electronic device within a 5-mile radius. Phones, computers, security systems, and the advanced Cerberus equipment that had been their lifeline to government support. In the sudden silence that followed, 47 of North America's most powerful supernatural beings found themselves cut off from the outside world, trapped in a lodge surrounded by forces that had been planning this moment for months. Sophia stood in the great room center, watching supernatural leaders who'd been engaged in civilized business discussions transform into their true natures as predatory instincts overrode corporate facades. Victoria Ashworth's elegant appearance sharpened into something that belonged in Gothic nightmares, her fingernails extending into claws that could shred steel. Marcus Thornfield's otherworldly beauty became alien and terrible, reality bending slightly around his form as fey magic responded to mortal threat. Chun Weiming's shadow detached completely from his body, flowing across walls and ceiling like liquid darkness, seeking targets. "Defensive positions," Alexander commanded, his voice carrying alpha authority that made every supernatural being present, regardless of species, respond with military precision. "Vampires take upper floors and windows. Fae establish perimeter wards. Shifters secure exit routes. Everyone else, prepare for siege warfare." Through their mate bond, Sophia felt Alexander's tactical mind processing threat vectors and defensive options within human speed. His corporate empire had been built on calculated risks, but this battle would be won or lost based on supernatural capabilities that no business school had ever taught. The lodge's reinforced windows exploded inward as projectiles designed specifically for supernatural targets tore through defensive barriers like paper. Silver-core bullets sparked against inhuman hide, blessed weapons sizzled with holy energy, and something that smelled like liquid death painted the air with chemical warfare designed to neutralize enhanced senses. Military-grade supernatural hunters, Dmitry Volkov observed with professional interest, his Russian accent lending gravitas to words that carried centuries of combat experience. Equipment suggests government funding, coordination indicates months of planning. Someone has been very thorough in their preparations for genocide. Alexander moved through the chaos like a force of nature, shifting fluidly between human and wolf form as tactical requirements demanded. When bullets came too close to Sophia, his protective rage manifested as supernatural fury that made the lodge's structural supports creak with the force of his transformation. "Sophia," he called over the din of supernatural warfare. "Communications blackout means Cerberus can't coordinate rescue operations. We need to restore contact with the outside world." Sophia's enhanced intellect was already processing possibilities, her corporate strategist background adapting to military crisis with the same analytical precision she'd once applied to hostile takeovers. The main communication array is hardened against EMP, but it's in the basement command center. Getting there means crossing 40 yards of open ground under sniper fire. "Then we make our own cover," Alexander replied, his eyes blazing gold with alpha determination. Around the great room, supernatural beings who'd spent decades hiding their true natures finally unleashed powers that redefined the possible. Victoria Ashworth moved with vampire speed that turned her into a blur of deadly elegance, her centuries of experience manifesting as combat skills that made professional soldiers look like children. Marcus Thornfield spoke words and languages that predated human civilization, and reality twisted around him like broken glass, creating defensive barriers that existed in dimensions attackers couldn't perceive. But it was Chun Weiming who provided the breakthrough they needed. His shadow form flowed through the lodge's walls like living darkness, emerging in the command center to manually activate backup communication systems that didn't depend on electronic components. Within moments, his voice crackled through speakers powered by supernatural energy rather than mundane electricity. External forces confirmed as military contractors with supernatural combat specialization, he reported, his words carrying an odd echo that came from speaking through manipulated shadow. Estimated 40 to 60 personnel, advanced weapons, coordination suggests extensive intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Alexander's expression hardened with grim understanding. They know exactly what we're capable of, which means they've been studying us for months. This isn't just an attack, it's a field test for systematic supernatural elimination. Sophia felt ice flood her veins as the implications became clear. The disappearances, the intelligence gathering, the perfect timing of the assault, all of it pointed to a coordinated effort to develop methods for eliminating supernatural beings who'd integrated with human society. "They're not just trying to kill us," she said quietly. "They're trying to prove that cooperation between humans and supernatural beings is impossible. If they succeed here, It justifies hunting down every supernatural who's ever worked with government agencies. Before anyone could respond, the lodge's front doors exploded inward with enough force to embed oak fragments in the opposite wall. The figures who poured through the breach moved with military precision, but their equipment was unlike anything in standard armed forces inventory. Armor that gleamed with silver inlay, weapons that hummed with energy designed to disrupt supernatural abilities, and coordination that suggested enhanced human capabilities. Enhanced human soldiers, Victoria Ashworth hissed, her vampire senses detecting traces of chemical and surgical modification that pushed normal human limitations into supernatural territory. Someone has been experimenting with creating super soldiers specifically designed to hunt our kind. The battle that followed redefined Sophia's understanding of supernatural warfare. Alexander coordinated pack tactics with corporate strategic thinking, turning the lodge's layout into a defensive advantage that channeled attackers into kill zones where supernatural abilities could be employed most effectively. Vampire speed combined with fey magic to create attacks that seemed to come from impossible directions, while shifter strength tore through advanced armor like it was tissue paper. But the enhanced human soldiers adapted with disturbing efficiency. Their weapons fired rounds designed to disrupt supernatural healing. Their armor incorporated protections against mind control and sensory manipulation, and their tactical coordination suggested they'd been training for this specific scenario for months. They know our weaknesses, Dmitry Volkov observed grimly as he tore through an attacker's throat with claws that could shred titanium. Every supernatural vulnerability, every species-specific limitation. This is what military supernatural research produces when applied to warfare. Sophia pressed herself against the great room's stone fireplace, trying to stay out of the line of fire while her enhanced mind processed tactical information at supernatural speed. The attacker's equipment, their coordination, their knowledge of supernatural capabilities, all of it pointed to one conclusion that made her blood run cold. Alexander, she called over the chaos of supernatural combat. This isn't a rogue military operation. This is Cerberus. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Every supernatural being present turned to stare at her, their various forms of inhuman beauty and terror focused with laser intensity on the implications of her revelation. Impossible, Alexander snarled, his partially transformed features showing fangs designed for tearing out throats. Cross has been working with us for months. The government partnership was a recruitment and assessment program, Sophia interrupted, her enhanced intellect putting together pieces that painted a picture of betrayal spanning months. They needed to know our capabilities, our weaknesses, our defensive strategies. The Integration Summit wasn't protection, it was intelligence gathering for systematic elimination. The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions confirmed her worst fears. Through shattered windows, they could see aircraft that bore no military markings, carrying soldiers whose equipment specifications exactly matched what they were already fighting. Commander Cross's voice crackled through the lodge's restored communication system, but now her tone carried cold satisfaction rather than professional cooperation. Attention supernatural entities in the Blackwood facility. You are surrounded by Task Force Cerberus enhanced personnel. Surrender immediately and submit to containment protocols or face termination. Alexander's roar of rage shook the entire lodge, windows cracking from the force of his supernatural fury. Around the great room, 47 of North America's most powerful supernatural beings realized they'd been betrayed by the very government agency they'd trusted to protect them. Mrs. Donovan, Cross continued, her voice carrying mock sympathy, your cooperation in the assessment phase has been invaluable. The intelligence you provided about supernatural defensive strategies and pack hierarchies will ensure that future operations proceed with maximum efficiency. Sophia felt something break inside her chest, not just betrayal, but the devastating realization that every moment of trust, every piece of cooperation, every attempt to build bridges between human and supernatural worlds had been weaponized against everyone she'd come to love. Alexander, she said quietly, her voice carrying a determination that made even the most powerful supernatural beings in the room pause to listen. Remember what you told me the night we met? About what kind of man you really are when you're not hiding behind boardroom tables and billion-dollar deals. Alexander's golden eyes met hers across the chaos of battle, and she saw understanding dawn in their depths. The corporate facade, the government cooperation, the careful balance between human society and supernatural nature, all of it had been stripped away, revealing the apex predator who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. "It's time to show them," Sophia continued, her enhanced senses picking up the approaching helicopters, the coordinated assault teams, the overwhelming force arrayed against them. "Show them what happens when someone betrays the trust of an alpha who's never lost a fight that mattered." Alexander's transformation was unlike anything she'd witnessed before. This wasn't the controlled shift between human and wolf forms. This was the unleashing of supernatural power that had been constrained by civilization, diplomacy, and the careful balance required for corporate success. When the change was complete, something stood in the lodge's center that was part man, part wolf, and entirely apex predator. "Pack." Alexander's voice carried harmonics that made the lodge's stone walls vibrate. "Hunt formation. No survivors. No mercy. No quarter." The response was instantaneous. 47 supernatural beings who'd been fighting defensively suddenly shifted to coordinated offense, their various species differences forgotten in the face of shared betrayal and common enemy. Vampire speed combined with werewolf strength, fey magic enhanced shifter senses, and ancient powers that had been hidden for centuries erupted into warfare that would redefine the balance between human and supernatural worlds. As enhanced Cerberus soldiers rappelled through shattered windows and reinforcements poured through breached entrances, Sophia realized that the first annual Supernatural Integration Summit had become the opening battle of a war that would determine whether supernatural beings remained hidden prey or became the apex predators they'd always been meant to be. The government had wanted to test whether supernatural beings could be eliminated through superior firepower and tactical coordination. They were about to discover that some tests produced results nobody was prepared for. Chapter 12. The battle for Blackwood raged through the night with an intensity that would have impressed generals throughout history. What had begun as a government ambush designed to eliminate supernatural leadership had transformed into a demonstration of why such beings had survived centuries of human persecution. Sophia crouched behind the lodge's massive stone fireplace, her enhanced senses tracking the flow of supernatural warfare that redefined every assumption about predator and prey. Alexander led his improvised pack with tactical brilliance that combined military strategy with predatory instinct. Victoria Ashworth moved through Cerberus soldiers like death itself, her vampire nature unleashed after decades of civilized restraint. Marcus Thornfield spoke reality into new shapes, creating defensive barriers that existed in dimensions enhanced human soldiers couldn't perceive or penetrate. Chun Weiming's shadow form flowed through the building structure like liquid darkness, appearing behind enemy lines to eliminate threats with surgical precision. But it was Dmitry Volkov who turned the tide of battle. The Russian supernatural enforcer had remained largely passive during the initial assault, seemingly content to observe American supernatural beings fight for their survival. But when enhanced human soldiers began deploying weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death, silver core rounds that burned from the inside out, energy weapons that disrupted supernatural healing, gas that attacked enhanced nervous systems, his centuries of professional violence finally engaged. "Enough," Volkov said quietly, and his voice carried undertones that made every enhanced human in the lodge freeze with primitive terror. What followed wasn't battle. It was systematic elimination carried out by something that had been perfecting methods of supernatural warfare since before America existed as a nation. Volkov moved through Cerberus soldiers with efficiency that belonged in nightmares, his ancient power unleashed without restraint or mercy. Enhanced human armor designed to withstand supernatural attacks crumpled like paper. Weapons that should have disrupted his abilities simply failed to function. Tactical coordination collapsed as soldiers found themselves facing something their training had never prepared them for. "Christ," Alexander breathed, watching Volkov dismantle an entire enhanced human squad with casual precision. No wonder the Eastern European supernatural communities never bothered with government cooperation. Through shattered windows, Sophia could see the helicopter assault teams retreating as reports reached them about what was happening inside the lodge. Whatever intelligence Cerberus had gathered about supernatural capabilities, it hadn't prepared them for unified response from beings who'd spent lifetimes learning to fight for survival. Commander Cross's voice crackled through the communication system, her professional composure finally cracking. All units, implement Protocol 7. Repeat, Protocol 7 is authorized. Alexander's eyes flashed gold with recognition of whatever Protocol 7 represented. Around the great room, every supernatural being went completely still with shared understanding of some threat that superseded individual species' concerns. Protocol 7? Sophia asked. Orbital kinetic bombardment. Alexander replied grimly. They're going to drop tungsten rods from satellite platforms. Complete area denial, no survivors. Official cover story of meteorite impact. The implications were staggering. Rather than accept defeat, Cerberus was prepared to eliminate an entire region of New York State to prevent supernatural beings from escaping their trap. The government agency, supposedly dedicated to managing supernatural human relations, was revealing itself as an extermination program willing to sacrifice human civilians to achieve its goals. How long do we have? Victoria Ashworth asked, her vampire senses already detecting changes in atmospheric pressure that preceded orbital strikes. 15 minutes, Alexander said, his supernatural hearing picking up satellite positioning signals that human ears couldn't detect. Maybe less. The lodge fell silent except for the sounds of enhanced human soldiers retreating and helicopters withdrawing to safe distances. 47 supernatural beings who'd been fighting for their lives suddenly faced annihilation from space-based weapons that couldn't be countered through individual power or collective strength. There has to be something, Sophia said desperately, her enhanced intellect racing through possibilities. Some way to counter orbital strikes, some defense. There is, Marcus Thornfield interrupted, his feigned nature allowing him to perceive possibilities that existed outside normal space-time. But it requires every supernatural being present to contribute power to a working that has never been attempted on this scale. What kind of working? Alexander asked. Dimensional displacement, Marcus replied, his otherworldly features sharpening with concentration. We move the entire Blackwood area, buildings, forest, everyone present, into a parallel dimensional space where orbital weapons can't reach us. The suggestion was audacious, beyond imagination. Dimensional manipulation on that scale would require power contributions from every species present, coordination that had never been achieved between supernatural communities, and success rates that couldn't be calculated because the working had never been attempted. The energy requirements alone would kill most of us, Victoria pointed out with vampire pragmatism. The alternative kills all of us, Alexander replied, his alpha authority beginning to coordinate supernatural beings who'd never worked together before. Marcus, what do you need? What followed was supernatural cooperation on a scale that redefined the possible. Werewolf pack bonds provided coordination frameworks that other species could plug into. Vampire life force manipulation channeled energy with efficiency that multiplied available power. Fey magic provided the dimensional framework that would allow physical displacement. Shadow form entities like Chun Weiming created connection pathways between beings whose natures were fundamentally incompatible. Sophia found herself at the center of the working, not because she possessed supernatural power, but because her enhanced human nature allowed her to serve as a focal point that other beings could channel energy through without being overwhelmed by species-specific limitations. 10 minutes. Alexander called out, his voice strained from the effort of maintaining pack coordination across multiple supernatural species. The lodge began to vibrate as 47 supernatural beings poured their combined power into a working that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. Reality around Blackwood started to blur at the edges, dimensional boundaries becoming fluid as Marcus Thornfield's Fey magic carved pathways into parallel space. But the energy requirements were even more massive than anticipated. Sophia felt supernatural beings around her beginning to collapse as their life force was drained beyond sustainable levels. The dimensional working was consuming power faster than they could provide it, and failure meant everyone present would be dead before orbital strikes became relevant. "It's not enough," Marcus gasped, his otherworldly beauty flickering as fey magic reached its limits. "We need more power than we have available." That's when Sophia realized what had to be done. The mate bond between her and Alexander wasn't just emotional connection. It was a supernatural link that could be used to channel energy between human and werewolf nature. If she could expand that connection to include other mated pairs present, if she could create a network of bonded supernatural beings. "Alexander," she said, her enhanced intellect processing possibilities at light speed. "The mate bonds. Not just ours. Everyone present who's bonded to someone else. We can use those connections to multiply available power." Alexander's eyes widened with understanding. Around the lodge, other supernatural beings began recognizing the implications. Mate bonds that had been personal relationships could be transformed into power-sharing networks that might provide enough energy for dimensional displacement. "5 minutes," someone called out. "Do it," Alexander commanded, and his alpha authority triggered responses from every bonded supernatural being present. What happened next redefined Sophia's understanding of love itself. The mate bond between her and Alexander exploded outward, connecting to other supernatural relationships throughout the lodge. Vampire pairs who'd found each other across centuries, fey lords bonded to otherworldly partners, shifters whose pack bonds had deepened into mated commitment. Every connection multiplied available power. Every relationship became a conduit for supernatural energy that transcended individual limitations. The dimensional workings suddenly had enough power to succeed. Reality around Blackwood twisted, folded, and slipped sideways into parallel space, just as tungsten rods began falling from orbit. Sophia felt the displacement like stepping through liquid starlight, the physical world dissolving and reforming in dimensions that existed adjacent to normal spacetime. When the working stabilized, they found themselves in a version of Blackwood that was identical to their original location but fundamentally separate from the world they'd left behind. Through windows that showed forest and lake exactly as they should be, they could perceive the crater where their lodge had existed moments before, a perfectly circular depression that would be explained as meteorite impact in government reports. "We're alive," Victoria Ashworth said with vampire amazement, her centuries of experience having never included dimensional displacement on this scale. "We're more than alive," Alexander replied, his alpha senses detecting changes in every supernatural being present. "The working didn't just displace us, it evolved us." Sophia felt it too, the enhancement of her already changed nature, the deepening of connections between all supernatural beings present, the sense that they'd become something more than the sum of their individual capabilities. The forced cooperation required for survival had created bonds between different species that had never existed before. "So, what happens now?" Chun Weiming asked, his shadow form more substantial and flexible than before their dimensional journey. Sophia looked around the lodge that had become their fortress, their sanctuary, and their new beginning. Through their enhanced mate bond, she could feel Alexander's thoughts aligning with her own, the recognition that they'd transcended the limitations that had made supernatural beings vulnerable to human persecution. "Now we build something better," she said with quiet authority. "Not integration with a human government that was planning genocide. Not hiding from a world that wants to destroy us. Something entirely new." Alexander's smile was radiant with pride and possibility. A supernatural nation that exists parallel to the human world. Protected, sovereign, and powerful enough to defend itself against any threat. Around the great room, 47 supernatural beings who'd been marked for elimination began to understand what they'd accidentally created. Not just escape from immediate danger, but the foundation of a supernatural civilization that could exist without human permission or oversight. The first annual Supernatural Integration Summit had ended with the realization that integration was impossible. But it had also begun something unprecedented in supernatural history, the birth of a nation that belonged entirely to beings who'd transcended human limitations. Commander Cross and Task Force Cerberus would spend years trying to understand what had happened at Blackwood, why their orbital strikes had destroyed an empty forest while their targets simply vanished from reality. They would never discover that 47 supernatural beings had stepped sideways into parallel dimensions and begun building a civilization that would challenge every assumption about the balance of power between human and inhuman worlds. But in their new dimensional sanctuary, Alexander and Sophia stood at the windows of what had once been a hunting lodge and was now the capital building of a supernatural nation, watching the sun rise over a forest that existed in the spaces between normal reality. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, his arms wrapped around his mate and his alpha authority extending over territory that couldn't be mapped by human geography. Sophia leaned back against his chest, feeling the bonds that connected her to every supernatural being in their new nation, understanding that she'd become something more than human without losing the strategic mind that had made their victory possible. "Just one," she replied with a smile of someone who'd turned corporate mergers into supernatural revolution. "I wish I could see the look on Commander Cross's face when she realizes we didn't just escape her trap. We used it to become everything she was trying to prevent." Through their mate bond, through the network of relationships that connected every being in their dimensional sanctuary, through the very fabric of their new reality, the supernatural nation celebrated its first dawn with the knowledge that some prey, when cornered, evolved into apex predators that redefined what it meant to rule. The corporate empire had become something far more magnificent, a supernatural dynasty that would endure across dimensions, sustained by bonds that no human weapon could ever break. Epilogue. 1 year after the Blackwood incident, as it came to be known in classified government files, Sophia Donovan stood on the observation deck of what had once been a hunting lodge and had evolved into the administrative center of the world's first interdimensional supernatural nation. The view through reinforced windows showed a landscape that was simultaneously familiar and impossible, the same Adirondack forest that had existed in baseline reality, but enhanced by fey magic that made colors more vivid, by vampire influence that painted shadows with deeper mystery, by werewolf territorial instincts that had turned every acre into perfectly balanced ecosystem. "The quarterly economic reports, Your Majesty," said James Morrison, his title as Chancellor of Interdimensional Commerce still causing him to smile with bemused pride. The Morrison-Donovan merger had evolved far beyond its original corporate parameters, becoming the economic foundation for a nation that existed in 7 parallel dimensions simultaneously. Sophia accepted the tablet with hands that had grown more graceful over the past year, her transformation from enhanced human to something entirely new continuing in ways that surprised even supernatural experts. The reports showed economic growth that defied conventional analysis, trade relationships with fey courts in dimensions where time moved differently, mining operations in realities where precious metals grew like crystals, agricultural programs that produced crops impossible in baseline physics. "Impressive numbers," she said, though her attention was focused on the deeper implications. "But what about the integration protocols for new arrivals?" Since the dimensional displacement, their sanctuary had become a beacon for supernatural beings seeking refuge from human persecution. Werewolf packs fleeing government hunting programs, vampire covens escaping modern surveillance technology, fey nobles displaced by industrial development of their traditional territories, all of them finding their way to Blackwood through dimensional pathways that Marcus Thornfield had spent months perfecting. "Current population stands at just over 3,000, James reported. "Housing development is keeping pace with arrival rates, though we're reaching the limit of what this dimensional space can support." The solution to their growth problems was approaching through interdimensional politics that would have impressed Byzantine emperors. Dmitry Volkov had negotiated territorial agreements with supernatural entities in adjacent realities, creating expansion options that required careful diplomatic balance between beings whose power levels spanned millennia. Speaking of expansion, came Alexander's voice from the observation deck's entrance. "The European delegation has arrived for the sovereignty recognition talks." Sophia turned to watch her husband and king approach, still marveling at how his presence could fill a room despite the vast power now residing in their dimensional nation. Alexander had grown into his role as Alpha King with natural authority, his corporate leadership skills translating seamlessly to supernatural governance. But it was the way his golden eyes softened when they met hers that reminded Sophia of the man who'd claimed her as mate in a Manhattan boardroom that seemed like centuries ago. Victoria's preliminary negotiations went well, she asked, accepting Alexander's kiss with a kind of casual intimacy that had scandalized supernatural nobility who expected more formal royal protocols. Better than expected. The ancient vampire houses are willing to recognize our sovereignty in exchange for trade agreements and dimensional access rights. Alexander's smile held. Satisfaction with diplomatic victories that would secure their nation's future. Even the Council of Shadows has agreed to formal recognition, assuming we can demonstrate sufficient military capability to defend our territorial claims. That particular demonstration was scheduled for the following month, when Task Force Cerberus would finally locate their dimensional sanctuary and attempt a second elimination operation. Intelligence networks that spanned multiple realities had provided advance warning, allowing supernatural military strategists to prepare defenses that would redefine orbital warfare. Commander Cross is going to get quite a surprise, Sophia said with a kind of professional satisfaction she'd once reserved for particularly elegant corporate takedowns. The former FBI agent had spent the year since Blackwood building enhanced human programs designed specifically for supernatural extermination, her failure at the summit having convinced government authorities that diplomatic solutions were impossible. Task Force Cerberus now operated with unlimited funding and authorization levels that existed outside normal government oversight, making them the most dangerous threat supernatural beings had ever faced. They were also walking into the most sophisticated trap in interdimensional history. Your Majesty, came Chun Weiming's voice from speakers throughout the observation deck, his shadow form now able to maintain communication across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Fey Courts are requesting final confirmation of tomorrow night's ceremony. Tomorrow night, the first anniversary of their dimensional displacement, and the formal coronation that would establish Alexander and Sophia as the official rulers of what historians would eventually call the Blackwood Nation. Representatives from supernatural communities across multiple realities would attend, creating the largest gathering of inhuman power in recorded history. It would also serve as the perfect bait for Cerberus's final assault, an attack that would demonstrate whether human military superiority could overcome supernatural evolution, or whether the balance of power had shifted permanently. Confirm all arrangements, Sophia replied, her enhanced intellect already processing the tactical implications of hosting formal ceremonies while preparing for interdimensional warfare. And remind the security chiefs that tomorrow night determines whether we remain a refugee sanctuary or become a legitimate supernatural power. As the sun set over their impossible kingdom, casting shadows that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, Alexander and Sophia stood together on the observation deck that had become their throne room. Through mate bonds enhanced by dimensional magic, they could feel the emotional states of every being in their growing nation, anticipation, loyalty, determination, and the kind of fierce pride that came from survival against impossible odds. Any regrets about how we got here? Alexander asked, echoing the question he'd posed a year earlier in very different circumstances. Sophia looked out at the forest that had become their domain, at the lights beginning to appear in windows of buildings that existed partially in multiple realities, at the aircraft beginning to arrive for tomorrow's ceremony from corners of existence that most beings never imagined. Just one, she replied, her smile carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd turned corporate strategy into supernatural revolution. I wish we could have warned Commander Cross what happens when you try to eliminate people who specialize in turning impossible situations into absolute victory. Through their interdimensional communication networks, intelligence reports were arriving about Cerberus preparations for tomorrow's assault, orbital weapons platforms, enhanced human strike teams, dimensional destabilization devices that would make their previous tungsten rod attack look like a child's toy. What Task Force Cerberus didn't know was that 47 supernatural leaders had spent a year preparing for exactly this confrontation, and that their interdimensional nation now included beings whose power levels existed outside normal reality constraints. The trap they'd set for human military forces would redefine warfare between species while establishing supernatural beings as the dominant force in any reality they chose to inhabit. Tomorrow changes everything, Alexander said quietly, his alpha senses detecting the approaching climax of a conflict that had been building since the first human learned to fear what prowled beyond campfire light. Tomorrow finishes what we started, Sophia corrected, her enhanced abilities allowing her to perceive probability streams across multiple dimensions. The question isn't whether we'll win, it's whether there will be anything left of human supernatural hunting programs when we're finished demonstrating what evolution looks like. As night fell over the Blackwood Nation, two beings who'd found love in a Manhattan boardroom prepared to defend a kingdom they'd built from corporate mergers, government betrayal, and the kind of predatory determination that had made them apex predators in whatever reality they chose to inhabit. The first annual Supernatural Integration Summit had failed because integration was impossible between species that occupied different levels of the evolutionary hierarchy. But it had succeeded in ways that would echo across dimensions for centuries to come, creating the foundation for a supernatural civilization that would challenge every assumption about the balance of power between human ambition and inhuman capability. Commander Cross would learn tomorrow night what happened when corporate strategy evolved into supernatural warfare. The lesson would be brief, educational, and absolutely final.
The end.